Good morning. We are broadcasting live from the Brussels Press Club. Good morning, Brussels. Good morning to the rest of the world watching us live. Today is a very special day and exceptionally warm in Belgium. February 21st, 2025. And this is Once Upon a Support, an event dedicated to 35 years of the European Day for Victims of Crime, and an official launch of Victim Support Europe's campaign, the Year of Victims' Rights. The event is powered by joint forces with the Polish Presidents of the Council of the European Union. My name is Marina Kazakova, Senior Communications Officer of Victim Support Europe, and I'm honored to be your MC on today's occasion. On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to extend a warm welcome to everyone in this room who traveled from near and far to be with us today. Before we start, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge a few housekeeping rules. Kindly switch off your phones or put them on the silent mode. You are on candid camera. This event is being recorded and will be available online very soon. So if you say something brilliant, rest assured it's immortalized. In case of fire, don't panic, just follow the exit signs. Time waits for no one. Our timekeeper, Larissa, could you please raise your hand? Will gently but firmly signal presenters when they have 5 minutes or 1 minute left. Food and drinks. Lunch and post-event drinks happen in the catering area. Well-being first. If you need emotional support, at any point, Larissa Spahic, again Larissa, is here to support you. Your well-being is our priority. Hybrid mode is on. Online participants, drop your questions in our chat. Our policy team will do their best to answer all of your questions during the event. This is a European moment. This event is one of over 20 events taking place across the European Union today to mark this 35th anniversary of the European Day for Victims of Crimes. We'll be collecting photos from all of the events to create a special memory book, Once Upon a Support. And with that, let's get started.
The 1990s in Europe, a decade of great change, marked by both triumph and loss. It was a time when history was shaped by both transformation and deep sorrow. October 3rd, 1990, German reunification. November 2nd, 1990, Transnistria War begins. December 20th, 1990, Tim Berners-Lee publishes the first website which described the World Wide Web project. In 1990, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change releases its first assessment report, linking increases in carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere and a resultant rise in global temperature to human activities. 1991, breakup of Yugoslavia. The ensuing wars caused tens of thousands of casualties and last for much of the following decade. 7th of February 1992, Maastricht Treaty. 1st of January 1993, launch of the single market. 1st of January 1994, European Economic Area is created. 1st of January 1995, the EU gains 3 new members, Austria, Finland and Sweden. 26th of March 1995, border-free travel begins in 7 countries. 2nd of October 1997, Treaty of Amsterdam. But amid these advancements and turmoil, something remarkable was born. In Stockholm, Sweden, the foundation for a new era of support and justice was laid. 1990, the Constitution of Victim Support Europe was adopted. It was also the year the European Day for Victims of Crime was officially proclaimed. And it was our 17 NGO heroes who, in the face of adversity, laid the groundwork for what would become a global victim support family. It was our heroes who laid the foundation, a foundation so strong it could weather any storm. But where are we now? 80 members, 36 countries, supporting over 3 million victims of crime every year. We are working on over 20 EU projects annually. We foster over 200 international partnerships. And we are expanding, introducing our sister organisations across continents, Victim Support Asia and Victim Support Americas. Together with our members and partners, we have shaped history. Key contributor to the 2012 Victims' Rights Directive. Shaping EU policy. 1. Substantially contributed to the first ever EU Victims' Rights Strategy. 2. Led proposals for the creation of the EC Coordinator for Victims' Rights and the EU Strategy for Victims' Rights. 3. Substantially influenced and contributed to hundreds of laws, resolutions and other measures, not only at the EU level, AI, confiscations, but also internally and nationally. Influencing the world. Ensuring the most favourable outcomes for victims through safe justice, a comprehensive national framework for victim support, effective communication with and for victims, and the provision of victim compensation. Advocating for a victim-centric, sensitive approach with a systemic, strategic and coordinated methodology involving multi-agency collaboration. This approach is transformative for victims policy. We are here, we are growing, and we will keep fighting for victims' rights until no one is left behind. This would have never been possible without our members and staff who work day in, day out to make us the leaders in the field, bringing hope, change and justice. And in return, we've received something priceless: the heartfelt smiles of survivors and support workers across the world. All in all, 12,775 rewarding working days and counting, to many more. Join the celebration.
What a memories. Yes. Excellency, esteemed speakers and distinguished guests, it's a great privilege to stand here and to introduce myself. My name is Rosa Jansen and I'm President of Victim Support Europe. And today I have the distinct honor of opening this momentous anniversary event co-organized by the Polish presidency of the Council of the European Union. And on this special occasion, it's my pleasure to welcome a special address to start with, a video message from Michael McGrath, EU Commissioner for Democracy, Justice, the Rule of Law and Consumer Protection. The European Commission plays a key role in proposing new laws and driving policy that help create a fairer and more compassionate Europe. And through its leadership, we continue to improve the rights and well-being of victims across the continent. With that in mind, let us turn to the screen and listen to Michael McGrath.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael McGrath, European Commissioner for Democracy, Justice, the Rule of Law and Consumer Protection. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you in person on this important day, but I am pleased to have an opportunity to share this message at the beginning of your symposium, marking tomorrow's impressive 35th anniversary of the European Day for Victims of Crime. As the European Commissioner responsible for criminal justice, I am determined to play my part in strengthening protection, support and access to justice for victims of crime. The sad fact is, crime can affect anyone and happen anywhere, and some 15% of Europeans fall victim to crime each year. Victims of crime are often among the most vulnerable members of our societies, and they can be left feeling isolated and unsure of where to turn for help. I've learned this firsthand through my experience as an elected representative in my home country in Ireland. I've heard of the traumatic impact that crime has on victims and the lifelong effects this can have on their physical and mental health. I've listened to the pain and struggles of victims, to their sense of being abandoned by the system, and how they might feel they are simply being used as witnesses without enough consideration for what they are going through. This is why, with your help, I will continue to push for change. If we provide victims with appropriate support, protection, and if we treat them with dignity, we can work to minimise many of the consequences of crime. The Victims' Rights Directive already sets minimum standards on victims' rights throughout the European Union. But as demonstrated by its evaluation, it is not enough. We can do more. And this is why the Commission proposed a revision of the directive. Our proposals are ambitious, but they are also proportionate. By tailoring support to victims, we can ensure that justice is victim-centred, child-friendly, and especially supportive of the most vulnerable victims. Due to the diverging positions of the co-legislators, the ongoing negotiations on the revision are not easy. But the co-legislators agreed that they want an ambitious revision with strong standards on victims' rights, and I will continue to support the co-legislators in this process. I am committed to an ambitious agreement on our proposal so that we can begin improving the lives of victims across our union, whoever and wherever they are. So let me finish by thanking you for your support in this process and most importantly for your long-standing assistance to millions of victims of crime throughout our union and beyond. I wish you a successful symposium. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Commissioner Michael McGrath and the European Commission for their steadfast support and solidarity on this European Day for victims of crime. It's great to hear that he is speaking about a great ambition, and of course we are all realistic, so we know that we have to do it step by step, and we can't wait to arrive on a certain level. But I think when you look to the video at the beginning, we all see that we had made a lot of progress, and that's very important, I think, to see. Thank for that, and we will say more during daytime. But it's so great that we always can have a discussion with the Commission, ask the Commission, and we exchange a lot of ideas. And it's great to have this kind of cooperation. And I see you there, Kasia, representing also the European Commission. So thanks for that already on this moment. Then now it's a great honor to invite onto the stage the Deputy Minister of Justice of Poland, representing the Polish presidency of the Council of the European Union, Zuzanna Rusinska-Bloch. Yes, thank you. Please take the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's not easy to pronounce my surname, especially the latter one. Actually, it translates into English Ivy, so Rudzinska Ivy it may be. It's really a great pleasure to be here this morning in Brussels with the Victims Support Europe. I feel honored that I'm here with you all and that we can just dive into discussions how to better support victims of crimes throughout our continent. As you all perfectly know, the European Union has been taking concrete actions for the past years to protect and support victims. The EU Victims' Rights Directive established standards that member states have implemented, creating effective, to some extent, and robust support systems. Most EU countries already have well-developed structures providing legal advice, psychological support, and assistance for victims and their families. These systems form a valuable foundation, kind of a starting point on which we must continue to build. However, as the organizers of today's conference know very well, we cannot stop at what has already been achieved. The Council recognizes the urgent need to update the existing legal framework. In recent years, a series of crises have significantly impacted the situations of crime victims. And just to name the few events of the past years, which we all know perfectly well, the COVID-19 pandemic, the migration crisis, and the Russians' aggression on Ukraine have placed additional strain on legal protection systems, highlighting the necessity of adapting and improving existing regulations. And in Poland, we know it best with the huge number of Ukrainians migrating to Poland to seek a safe haven from the war. I want to emphasize that the Polish presidency will consistently strive for successful negotiations with the Parliament concerning the draft directive on strengthening victims' rights. Our priority is to continue the work, advance the negotiations, and ultimately reach a political agreement. However, the key goal remains to make regulations better suited for the real challenges faced by victims. And having said so, I wanted to, looking at the timekeeper, I wanted to underline three areas that we are right now wrapping our minds around in Poland when thinking of the national victim support system. The very first one, very important to me and probably to you all, is that the victim support system has to be based on very close cooperation with a non-governmental organization and civic society. I know it best. I worked with the former ombudsman for 5 years, and we know that the non-governmental organizations are the first responders, know the needs of the victims, know how to reach them, and how to enter into dialogue in such a difficult situation of the victims and their families. This is why we are right now thinking in Poland how to rebuild the network for the support of victims. The network that is currently working in Poland, financed from the state treasury, is distributing funds for the NGOs to help the victims. However, there is exactly what was mentioned in the movie at the beginning. We are lacking multi-agency cooperation. We are lacking the learning system from one NGO to another. We are lacking the distribution of experience and knowledge. Therefore, we need to improve the system as well as to support the supporters. This is so much needed to help them to have also psychological help, to have assistance, and to have the discussion among the peers, among the helpers. The second issue that is a foundation for me when thinking of a national system are the values of the European Union, especially observing what is going on the world today. We need to remember that democracy, rule of law, human rights are not just the mere values that are pointed out in Article 2. We have to know that they go down and they reach the weakest. What do they mean? I guess for all of us, they mean to support the weakest in our social systems. And the weakest, for the time being, are the victims of crimes. And therefore, in all our narratives, I think we have to make this link to show that the values are not the abstract forms, but that they have very practical consequences. And thirdly, what is on my mind when I think of the system to support victims in Poland are the children. We still lack the support to children victims of crime in Poland. Therefore, some kind of special centers, whether those will be barnahuses or other form, has to be created. Still, our justice system is not ready to hear, support, and lead through the difficult time the child victims as well as their families. Therefore, we are now thinking how to establish the whole system of centers for children so that there will be the least burden on the children themselves and on the families, but that the system will be friendly and helpful in those difficult times for children. So wrapping up, looking at the timekeeper, 2 minutes still. I can go on, but I will save some time for the further speakers. I wish you a very fruitful discussions, and please carry on the work, because I've been where you are. I've worked for the NGO. I work for the National Human Rights Institution. Now I work for the Ministry of Justice, and I am certain that without the dialogue, without the information passed on through many stakeholders in the country, we cannot build the perfect system, and we need a perfect one. So each of us is holding a puzzle piece, and unless we get together and put those puzzles together, we cannot build the system that will work for the victims. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Rusinska, for your commitment in advancing victim rights. I think, as representative of the Polish presidency, the principal decision-making body of the EU, your presence here is very important. But even more, I think, what you said, because when I listen to you, then I hear ambition. Then I hear the importance of cooperation, and underlining that you really want to make steps. And I think it's our 35th anniversary. So, if I may say, your words are a beautiful present for us here today. And thank you for that. And let's work hard, because I really think that we can't leave any victim behind. And I think the only way we can do it is working in the international European context together, and try to take all of us a piece, because it's impossible. There is no organization in this world who can do it alone these days, so we have to do it together. Thank you for that. Yes, then it's my honor to give the word to another distinguished speaker, whose dedication to advancing victim rights has been truly exceptional, because he worked for a long time with Victim Support Europe. So it's a great honor to give the word to you, Mrs. You also have a real difficult name, Katarzyna Janika Pawlowska, coordinator for victim rights at the European Commission. And as a coordinator for victims' rights, you help us continuous with improving and thinking about what kind of steps we can make in the field of helping victims in Europe. And you are responsible for driving the implementation of the EU strategy on victim rights, a very important task, ensuring that policy translates into meaningful support and protection for victims across Europe. So I'm very curious to your speech, but we already know together that we have worked very hard. So please, can I give you the floor?
Thank you so much, Rosa. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends, it is indeed a great pleasure for me to be here today with you, celebrating this important day, accompanied by excellent representation from the Polish presidency. First, I would like to thank Victim Support Europe not only for gathering everyone today ahead of the European Day of Victims' Rights once more, but also for your efforts to make this year's celebrations special. And I would like to thank you also for your courage to call 2025 as the European as the European Year for Victims' Rights. These days, more than ever, we really need that courage to request that fundamental rights of some of the most vulnerable members of our societies are respected. And here I really couldn't agree more with the Polish minister, Ms. Rudzińska-Bluszcz. I do have some linguistic advantages here. That it is absolutely necessary, especially these days. We need to make this very close link between the fundamental rights, between the human rights, and the actual support that we are providing every day for those who need it most, for the most vulnerable members of our society, for victims of crimes. And especially these days, with the growing threats to our democracies, to our safety, even to security in the European Union, we cannot forget about the victims. We cannot forget about victims of crime. Let's not forget how we treat victims of crime measures the depths of our civilization, really, and it measures the strength of our democracies. That is why in 2025, strengthening of victims' rights should be the key political issue. It is a matter of urgency, indeed. And we cannot stop, even though we have made already quite a big progress in this area. The idea of providing support to victims of crime is a relatively new idea in our criminal justice schemes. Similarly, as bringing victim more to the center of the criminal justice, this is also a relatively new area. If you think about the victim support services, we've been just seeing a beautiful video that put it nicely on the historical political line of the last decade. But let me recall the very beginning of the victim support services. And I'm looking here at Helgard from Weissering. Indeed, it started in the middle 70s with the Weissering of Germany being set up as the first grassroots organization in 1976, I think. It was followed by Weissering in Austria in the 70s as well. The next wave of victim support services would be somewhere in the 80s with France, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Hungary setting up the victim support services. The third wave, important wave of setting up victim support services comes in the 90s and early 2000 with the Portuguese APAF. Hello, João, set up in 1990 with the Czech Republic Bielwy Kruk. I think we have a representation as well, followed by Finnish Riku. Yes, hello, in 1994, followed by Spain, Luxembourg, Croatia, and Poland. The final important wave was kind of triggered, I would say. This comes in after 2015, after the entry into application of the Victims' Rights Directive, where the remaining member states had no choice but had to set up the victim support services. And of course, 1990, very important day, very important milestone, setting up of Victim Support Europe. All these grassroots movements have been accompanied with the legislative changes, both at national and at the EU level. And here again, we have made a great progress since 2001, setting of the adoption of the framework decision of victim standing in criminal proceedings. Today, we have the 2012 Victims' Rights Directive, the main horizontal instrument that deals with all victims of all crimes. And it is accompanied by a set of sectorial legislation. So we have the directive on counterterrorism, we have directive on child sexual exploitation, we have directive of anti-trafficking, and very importantly, the new addition to the family, the directive on combating violence against women and domestic violence. And some of these pieces of legislation have been recently revised or are in the process of the revision. The anti-trafficking directive, the revision has been adopted last year. Now, of course, the Victims' Rights Directive is in the process of revision. And also we have on the table two instruments on child sexual exploitation, the revision of the directive and the new regulation that deals more specifically with a very important rising problem of child sexual abuse online. So On the top of that, let's not forget, we have 2004 a directive on victims' compensation that has been recently interpreted by the Court of Justice. So we have a new body of the case law that interprets what constitutes fair and appropriate compensation for victims. Also very important within the negotiations on the revision of the Victims' Rights Directive. And we have 2 instruments on European protection order. So this is really impressive set of legislation that has been established only in the past 20 years. But all these pieces of legislation would be meaningless if they are not correctly applied in practice. And here, I don't have such a good news, and you all know it. It was also discussed at the Benedict conference yesterday. We can see that, unfortunately, there is still a lot that needs to be done when it comes to practical application of all these beautiful pieces of legislation that are already adopted. Indeed, still too often I keep on hearing about individual victims who cannot benefit from their rights. I keep on hearing about victims who, for instance, cannot request compensation in the criminal proceedings just because they were not properly informed some months earlier that they need to constitute a civil party to the criminal proceedings, which is required by the legislative scheme. So no compensation for them in the criminal proceedings. And also, too often I hear about victims, and this is really mostly about victims of sexual violence, who truly regret for making a complaint at all, because they had to go through the ordeal of the criminal proceedings. This is not acceptable. This is not acceptable in 2025. We have all these pieces of legislation, and still, according to the FRA studies, 2/3 of victims of serious crimes do not report the crime, and they have good reasons to do that. So, yes, in 2025, we cannot stop. I am confident that we are on a good path to finalize an ambitious revision of the Victims' Rights Directive, especially under the leadership of the Polish presidency. I'm also confident that once this is done, we'll be able to look very carefully on what are additional actions, non-legislative actions, that will be taken into the new EU strategy on victims' rights, because after the adoption of the revision of the Victims' Rights Directive, that will be the next urgent task to deal with. I'm also glad to see that victim support organizations, both at national and EU level, keep on working and providing the essential support to victims, even though I know very well it is not easy. And we heard it again yesterday very clearly. Too many victim support organizations are having huge financial problems. They are facing insecurity. They don't know how to plan for the next year because they have no clue if they will get any funding whatsoever. So in this regard, indeed, big congratulations to Victim Support Europe, because you are this example of the organization that thrives despite all the obstacles. The 35 years, beautiful achievements, and 80 organizations in 35 member states, not only member states, but also outside the European Union. You keep on growing, you keep on providing support to millions of victims. I've heard that only last year you have accepted the additional application from the Ukrainian Center for Victims and Witnesses of Crime. So this is positive development. You keep on growing, and your role is absolutely crucial in the application of all these rules that we are creating at the European level, and then they are translated into the national policies, because you are those who are guiding the victims, the most vulnerable members of our society, through some of the most difficult moments of their life. So thank you for all your work, and congratulations on your anniversary. Thank you, everyone. I look forward to many good discussions that we'll have today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kasia, for your stimulating words. We really have work to do all together. At the end of these opening speeches and standing here, I take the opportunity to also share some words with you at the beginning. Today, as we gather here, we mark a deeply significant occasion, the 35th anniversary of the European Day for Victims of Crime. And I always say, when you have your 35th anniversary, you have seen a lot in the world. If you took to young ones, I find it very old, but you have still also a very long period to go with all this experience, and you have, I think, the power to set next steps, and I think that's so very nice on your 35th anniversary. It's, I think, a moment for both reflection and determination, a celebration of our shared achievements and a renewal of our unwavering commitment to justice and support of victims of crime. Since our establishment in 1990, we have already seen it on the video in Sweden, in Stockholm. This day has served as a beacon of hope, if I may say so, from unity and resilience. And over the past 35 years, we have worked together, NGOs, governments, institutions, but also countless individuals, to ensure that victims' voices are not only heard, but acted upon. And yet, we know that our work is far from finished. I think all of us say that today. And that's pity, because in a way I always say the important moment of my own organization is when we have done everything, but I think it's a pity, but it's a little bit an illusion, but we can do as much as possible, I think. Our gathering today is further weighted by a painful recent tragedy when we look to this Stockholm situation, because just a few weeks ago the city of Örebro in Sweden suffered a devastating mass shooting. I think the worst in their country's history, and at least 10 lives were cruelly taken, leaving similar families, friends and entire community behind them. And I think it's good to think about these victims also today, because then we know why we do our work. We have to realize that every day, and we honor their memory today, standing together in solidarity with all victims of crime, knowing that our mission is more urgent than ever before. And I mentioned the tragedy in Sweden, but I think we have seen it in Germany, and we have seen it when I don't know. We all read social media every minute of the day, and I'm always afraid when I open the phone again, because mostly we see another disaster, and we know more than anyone else what it means for the people who are involved and their relatives, and that it's not that moment, but it is, and we will later hear it from another speaker, what it means for the family and for the rest of your life. That's so important, I think, to take care of victims. This year is not just another milestone, it's the launch of crucial year-long campaign, 2025, the Year of Victims' Rights. And it's a year in which we recognize multiple anniversaries that have shaped the landscape of victim rights. That's not a surprise, I think, because you gave us an overview how the history has developed, and then you can imagine that this year we have the anniversary of the 25th anniversary of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. We also have the 40th anniversary of the UN Declaration of Basic Principle of Justice for Victims of Crime and Abuse of Power. Then we have the 5th anniversary of the first EU Victim Rights Strategy. And of course, the 35th anniversary of Victim Support Europe. And then I don't mention that later in May we have the 35th anniversary of APAF. Last year we had the 14th anniversary of Slachtofferhulp Nederland. And I think all our organizations in this period are between, I think, 20 and 40 years old. And I believe some are even a little bit older, in the UK, for example. And it has to do that on that moment we realized that we had to do more for victims. Till then, I was in my life for long years. I was a judge, and the victims were always there in the courtroom but never spoke, were in the files. And it's very surprising because I always say victims are the only one who didn't ask to be in the courtroom. All the other ones are professionals or perpetrators and whatever, but they have to be there and really have had to fight for a long time to at least to say something. I remember myself, and not to say that I was the only one, but it took a long time also in the Netherlands before it was in the law. And on one moment I was in court together with 3 of my colleagues, and we said, why don't we give them the possibility to speak in the courtroom? And someone said, oh, it's not in the law, it's not in the law. So everyone became very nervous, but I was the chair of that court session, and I said, let's start. I call the prosecutor and I tell him that we like to do that, and I inform the advocates of the perpetrators, and everyone said, no, okay, that's perfect. And we didn't need a rule at all at that moment, because we can decide a lot for ourselves. And sometimes when I look to all these official organizations and institutions to write down all kinds of law and directives, and we really need them, so don't stop writing them. But I think also let's use our own possibilities, because I think all together we are so very strong and we can do so much, and maybe it's even easier to do it without rules, because then you can you think about it yourself, and there are a lot of possibilities. And I'm always the creative one, so I was that judge, but in a way I don't like rules. It's a very strange combination of things. I think don't tell my old colleagues. That's fine, but these milestones remind us how far we have come, because I think that's also very important. Because when I reflect on my own journey and I look back in this field, I remember most moments of both triumph but also heartbreak. And I recall speaking to victims whose pain was compounded not only by the crime itself, but also by the institutional barriers that followed after that. Some people say that was even worse than maybe the moment I heard about what has happened. And I have also seen firsthand the difference we can make when support structures are strong, when legislation is robust, and when society truly acknowledges victims' needs. And yet, despite decades of legal advancement, our work is not finished. It's already said, victims still face systemic obstacles, barriers to justice, access to information, and adequate support services. Our latest benefit conferences, Kasia mentioned it already, the research findings have brought to light stark realities. Too many victims still feel unheard, underserved, and unprotected. And I think that's very sad to get it out of a report. On the other hand, it's good to realize, because some people do us believe that we have arranged everything. The findings reveal that while many members have incorporated victims' rights into national law, implementation remains inconsistent, leaving victims struggling to access justice and support. And many face challenges understanding their rights due to complex legal language, while support services remain uneven, particularly in rural areas or in different countries. Referral mechanisms often exclude certain victim groups. Individual assessments are inconsistently applied, and compensation processes remain complex and inaccessible. It always has to be very difficult. You have to bring in all your factors, all your receipts and whatever, and on that moment of being traumatized, I think that's not what you want to do. You want to have it easy. You want other people to think for you. It's still possible, I think. Furthermore, training for professionals is limited. It's still limited. And despite progress in addressing domestic and gender-based violence, the rights of many other victims have seen little advancement. And these findings highlight the urgent need for stronger implementation, better coordination, and truly victim-centered approach. This is why 2025 cannot be just another year. It must be a year of decisive action. We also find ourselves at a critical moment in the European policy. The EU is currently discussing budget allocations, and we are facing financial constraint that could impact victim support services. And it's our duty to ensure that victims' rights remain central to these discussions and that the funding is secure to continue our essential work. Our mission is in fact twofold in 2025. First, to push for vital policy reforms, most notably the adoption of the revised Victim Rights Directive as broad as possible, and second, to continue working towards a gradual yet fundamental shift in societal perception of victims, fostering greater understanding and support. Victims' rights should not be an afterthought. They are fundamental to a just and fair society, and we must integrate these rights into the very fabric of our social systems, ensuring long-term progress and not just short-term victories. Our campaign is a vital step in our long-term strategic journey towards this transformation, and we want to ensure that every victim, regardless of the crime they have endured, is met with dignity, respect, and meaningful support. Throughout the year, for that reason, I don't look to you, that's always very easy, then I don't see the time. I go on with, that's so nice when you are the president, you can decide something. Sorry, I will speed up. Throughout the year, we will host significant events to amplify our message and drive change. First of all, today, we launch our campaign celebrating 35 years of the European Day for Victims of Crime. In May, we go to Lisbon, and not only for the party for the 35th anniversary of APAV, but we also have our General Assembly there, 35 years of victim support in Europe, reflecting on progress and challenges. And then in November, we have a finally campaign event, and that's called More Than Words, and it's commemorating 40 years of the EU Victims Declaration and hopefully celebrating the adoption of the revised Victim Rights Directive. No pressure. These events will not just be moments of reflection, but call to action, ensuring that our collective advocacy translates into meaningful change. While we celebrate our past achievements, 2025 must be also serve as a launchpad for the next phase of our work. We must remember that back in 1990, there was no legal foundation for victim rights at the EU level. It was only the Lisbon Treaty that victim rights gained legal recognition, and the European Union has played an instrumental role in advancing victim protections, and we must safeguard these gains. Without the EU's continued commitment, many victims across Europe would not have access to the rights and support they have today. Thank you for that. At the same time, we see challenges on the horizon. Some member states are turning away from victims' issues, prioritizing them at a national level. We are already talking about funds. This is a delicate moment, I think, one where we cannot afford to lose momentum. The revision of the directive has already taken years. We cannot let another decade slip by without decisive progress. Whether we succeed is up to us. Therefore, dear colleagues, my thought is this: take nothing for granted. Our individual freedoms are not self-evident. Democracy is not self-evident, and neither is peace nor prosperity. But if we work hard and unite, if we embrace new beginnings, then anything is possible. Walls can collapse and justice can be served, and we can ensure that every victim is treated with dignity and recognized for their suffering. We can provide protection from intimidation and further harm, and we can offer the support they need: immediate aid, long-term care, and psychological healing. We can guarantee access to justice, empowering victims with knowledge of their rights, and give them a voice in every process. We can secure compensation and restoration, helping them rebuild their life. We can do all this, and it is precisely with these words that I would like to share with you my next thought. Let's discover the unexpected in what's possible. Let's amaze ourselves with what we can accomplish. As we look ahead, I leave you with this call to action. Our success depends on our unity. We have to work together. We have to take every chance. And even when there is no budget, we can do a lot when we stay together. But it helps, I'm sure about that. We have a responsibility to those who suffered, to those whose lives have been altered by crime. And let us stand together, unwavering, to ensure that every victim receives the justice, support and recognition they deserve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosa. Thank you to all inspiring women speakers who were opening our event. Now we are turning a page, and it's my heartfelt honor to introduce someone truly exceptional, an individual who journeyed here from the depths of the Black Forests. This remarkable person is a dedicated grassroots activist who has championed the victim support movement across Europe for over 40 years. As a former vice president of Victim Support Europe and one of the founding mothers of Victim Support Europe and movement, her passion and bravery have laid the foundation upon which Victim Support Europe and all of us, all the NGOs that are our members, are standing today. In recognition of her lifelong commitment, she was awarded the Silver Medal of the Bavarian Constitution in 2019 for her outstanding work with Reaffirming Germany. For her, victim support isn't just a service or just a job. It is an attitude, still. Her dedication and vision continue to inspire us all. And it is my great privilege to welcome to this stage Miss Helgert van Heulen.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you, and I am truly touched by this warm welcome and introduction, I must say. For many years I have witnessed and been part of the European victim support movement. And let's start. Once upon a time, it sounds like a fairy tale. It shouldn't be, but I don't stick too much about the facts, but about the results we achieved and the work we did. For centuries, when a crime was committed, the focus was on preventing further offences. This often involved in harsh punishments, you know that, such as death sentences and physical penalties. For example, a chief lost his right hand. And during the Enlightenment, there was a shift toward viewing the individual and recognizing the potential for offenders to be rehabilitated through socialization and education. I learned this was a young guy in Amsterdam with whom that started. It wasn't until the 20th century, and you put it out nicely, Kasia, there was a shift toward viewing the individual and recognizing the potential for offenders to be until that society began to acknowledge the existence of victims. In the 1860s, when I was a student, I had a professor who said, when sentencing the offender, you must always think of other potential victims. That was the first and only time I heard someone speak of victims and not just of witnesses, but as individuals deserving of attention in their own rights. Once upon a time, back in the 80s, victims were largely invisible. There was no structured support and certainly no European movement, though we had this Reaffirming Circle, Luxembourg with it as well. And, in those early days, in many countries, victim support movements started. For example, there were offices in England, they were the first, and Germany was the first one to have a nationwide association. Next year, 50 years. So there will be a celebration as well. Along with the developing of the EU, a small but determined group of supporters shared a vision, a Europe where victims would be seen, heard and supported. We understood that justice must heal the wounds left behind. But it wasn't easy. There were more resistance than was anticipated. Institutions, like always is something new comes, were hesitant and said crime prevention and law enforcement were their priorities, and victims, they were an afterthought. The founders walked into countless meetings holding reports filled with heartbreaking testimonies, advocating for legal frameworks and being told that our cause was noble but not urgent. Not urgent. The generation of the founders formed alliances with NGOs, legal experts, activities and policymakers across Europe. They built a coalition and it ended up in the founding of Victim Support Europe. And so in 1990, from the efforts of 17 NGOs from Austria, Belgium, Czech Republic, Denmark, Finland, Germany, Hungary, Portugal, Russia, Serbia, Slovakia, Switzerland, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom, Victim Support Europe was founded and the European Day for Victims of Crime was proclaimed. You realize it was not only EU countries, but there were those of the Council of Europe as well. It was not just a symbolic gesture. It was a promise that no victim would ever be invisible again. And the recognition and support, and that's the big change, would not depend on the goodwill of individuals, but be embedded in laws, institutions, and society itself. I was not with the movement from the very beginning. I joined it a little bit later. I joined Reaffirming in 1992 about that time, and I heard about the then called European Forum for Victim Services and became soon active. We all refused, and we still had the same problems. We refused to accept inaction. Between the proclamation and nowadays, the world has changed. We have heard about this. And it's true that the German unity is, as our Chancellor at that time, Helmut Kohl, said, German unity and European integration are two sides of the same coin. So keeping that in mind, it's really very important to keep on. Without the solidarity movement in Europe, we wouldn't have had any unification in Germany. That is why the presence of Victim Support Europe, both here and that's, for me, that's very important, through its members across all European member states, carries profound symbolic significance. Up to now, we heard the figures, 35 years victim support in Europe, 35 years Victims' Day, and all the other achievements. I will not repeat them. We know it. Allow me to share, in addition, some personal individual stories with you, my personal experience. I told you already, I only came in later, and what was most impressive for me? I must admit the annual conferences first. The first time I believe I attended one was in 2000 or 2001 in Berlin. We German participants were ashamed of the circumstances. No program for the evenings, the German organizer disappeared, and we did our best to organize something that they could eat together because we were far away from the city. And we were just, okay, we have something to eat. Lucky. And all of a sudden, a program developed. Each country contributed. They sang fado and folk songs, or they performed. Only the Germans, they refused to do anything. So finally, my colleague Walter Schwab and I sang Guten Abend, Gute Nacht, good evening, good night, and the evening ended perfectly. Singing myself and with an audience is something my son is is something unbelievable for me. It never happened again, but it showed me the emotional value of the conferences. There is the personal value to get to know and understand others. For some time, it was discredited in Victim Support Europe as it's just a family gathering. Yes, in a certain way it is, but it is a lot more and it is fine. It is a huge fund of ideas and knowledge. I always came home with new input to Weissering Germany, be it multilingual services in the beginning or exchange of stuff or online and so on services. And in addition, one experience as a participant venues all over Europe. You get to know other countries and towns and have more understanding. You often come to places that are even not open to public, so that's an additional gift you get. For example, just one example, the Czerny Palais in Prague, but I could talk about Edinburgh, I could talk about Lisbon, I could talk about Berlin, the last conference we had in Berlin. And in addition, there were the board meetings and their activity. Board members had meetings and tried to contact EU institutions, governments and the Council of Europe. Everything we had to organize ourselves. Legally, Victim Support Europe started in Switzerland. Under Helen Reeves' presidency, it moved to London and then ended up here in Brussels. VSE in a big part at that time depending on EU funding. Meeting someone from Parliament or Commission was rare and good luck. We realized we need permanent staff in Brussels. We started off with Helen Heinrichs having a desk in the offices of the ENCG. The workload grew. We were looking for an office, and we board members walked around in Brussels to find some. Moving mostly was done ourselves. And then the first office became too small, and the next one is too small. And now you just move to another part of the same building, so it doesn't show that much, but they have a bigger office now, and around 20 staff members. 30. That's what I heard yesterday, and I was told 20. Okay, it is already too small because they moved now again. I remember that in the beginning, Zhao and I, for example, read all applications and also did the interviews together with Lev. I love to remember Marina's interview when she was sitting there with a nice black hat, and we didn't know what to do about her. Look at her now. And as to Lev, when he first indicated his interest to work with Victim Support Europe, he was too expensive for us. Only 2 years later we could afford you, and we are lucky. Memory is a strange thing. Some of you will have totally different things to remember. For me, the worst was the time as treasurer with no proper accountant and lots of debts, sleepless nights, and you can imagine. I could go on, but I think it's enough. Today, as we mark the 35th anniversary for victims of crime, we face huge political changes. A little bit like in the 19th, but that was to our advantage. Now we really don't know, and we heard about all the things we want to achieve. We have come far, but we are not done. There are challenges ahead. The new crimes we have to deal with, and that will be also for the work, for the helpers, very difficult. I'm also the leader of a local office. More and more people where it's okay. Cases come, more and more victims come, and it's quite difficult to give them advice and help them. And there are ongoing other questions. I heard already a little bit about it. Discussing membership, who should be members, full members, assistant, all the things we have in the Constitution. And I heard yesterday from my son, who was here for a conference in another support or EU association. They have the same problems. And our systems only, up to now, concentrate on Europe, and that's fine, so, but the discussion will go on. Another never-ending question, financing everything, and how can, and that's for me the most important, how can DSE be of service to all its members? I believe the services to victims is the center of our history in present days and should and will be in future. We have to decide what we want to leave for the next generation. We heard already a lot about it, democracy and the value of supporting victims. The fight for victims' rights, it's not just about individual cases, we know that. 35 years ago, we stood before an uncharted path. Today, we stand on the foundations we built, strong, unwavering and determined. We must not be naive. In many countries, Eurosceptics are ready to misuse the power for their own gain, and we must show them the value of cooperation within the EU. We heard already about what you want to achieve, the Victims' Rights Directive revised, and all the other goals you have, so I can leave that out. Allow me to conclude with a personal note. As a music lover, Marina suggested, it was nice cooperation between us, a special piece of music for today. In February 2025, we celebrate the birth of a prolific 19th century German composer, Felix Mendelssohn. His iconic A Midsummer Night's Dream Ouverture uncovers each time new nuances that continue to inspire. In much the same way, Europe too, and that's the bridge, Europe too is a place that can be rediscovered over and over again, continually captivating our hearts and imagination. This music was composed in 1826. Remarkably, Mendelssohn, in Germany we say Mendelssohn Bartholdy, Mendelssohn was only 17 years old when he wrote it. In a way, the music reflects the spirit of a young person, with the message embedded in Mendelssohn's piece that everything is possible and enchanting. And by supporting one another and standing together, we have the power, we all together, to create a future filled with promise and possibility, and I add with passion for the victims. Thank you. She told me to stay.
We are listening 1 minute of Mendelssohn. And a round of applause to Helgard. Thank you, Helgard. We can continue with the video 1 minute. Thank you very much, everyone. The first bouquet of flowers was an unexpected surprise. It's not It's not scripted. Thank you, Joao. The second one is scripted one. So, thank you, Helga.
Thank you for everything and for the nice speech. I always have learned you have to know your history to work for. Oh, sorry. Thank you for your beautiful words. I always have learned you have to know your history, otherwise you don't know what you have to do in the future. So thank you for that very much, and for this beautiful music piece. And we give you for all the years and for all the evenings and all the nights that you have worked beautiful flowers. Thank you very much. Thank you.
May I add one memory? I just saw Princess Anne there, and I had to introduce her when she came in. And I had to learn this text, and I know it till nowadays. Her Royal Highness, the Princess Royal, and afterwards I could say ma'am.
We are moving forward, and I'm inviting to the stage our executive director, Levent Altan, to introduce the next, the most important speaker of today. Levent, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Marina. Good morning, everyone. I have the absolute pleasure and honor to introduce a good friend, Guillaume Denois de Saint-Marc. He has, since 1989, he's navigated loss, resilience, and the long road to justice. He's going to be reflecting on both those achievements and the challenges, and he stands, I think, as a testament to how victim support in the justice system has evolved, acknowledging progress while underscoring how much still needs to change. So we're gathered here today to explore the power of victims' voices, their impact in shaping laws, policies, and advancing victim support. So who better to lead that conversation than a man who's turned personal tragedy into a lifelong mission of advocacy. So I'm going to welcome Guillaume to the stage, and I will be asking a couple of questions. That's it. We keep it simple and friendly. I'll come over.
Okay.
There we go.
Join me, please.
So I'll just ask Guillaume, maybe you can tell everyone your story starting in 1989 and the progress over the years.
Anyway, first for, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for your words. It's a big honor for me to be here, representing some of the victims that who you're giving support. And I would like to share my experience during the 35 past years, not yet 36, but it will be in September, as a victim and a volunteer, and then as a professional in the support given to victims in France and in Europe, but also worldwide, because under my tragedy it was international. In fact, I became a victim on the 19th of September 1989 due to the explosion of a plane over Africa. It was a plane coming from Brazzaville, going to N'Djamena in Chad, and 1 hour after taking off in N'Djamena, exploded over Niger, and there was no survivors. 170 persons were on board, and unfortunately, my father took the plane in N'Djamena. I was 27 at that time. And suddenly my life changed completely. And yeah, it was, of course, a difficult time. At that time, what is important to know is that it was a terrorist attack due to the Gaddafi regime. We learned that a few years after, during the investigation. But we had no support, no psychologist, no lawyers. There was a compensation fund who had been created a few years before, I would say a few months before, and we were the first one to be compensated by this fund, and it did work very well because it was very administrative. It was not victim oriented. We had silly, stupid questions It was like a bit aggressive, of course, because they didn't know how to do. Fortunately, it changed, but at that time we were the first ones, so it was really a bit tough. It took me 2 years to join an organization, but was an organization of victims of terrorism called SOS Attentat, and to be a civil part. And the good thing that the law about civil parties changed in France due to the pressure of Europe or the work we did all together, because I was part of NAVT, the network of Association of Victims of Terrorism, supported by the Commission, and we were, trying to put the case of the victims forwards, not only the one of the perpetrators, but the rights of the victims and how can it be effective. So we could every year, what's changed step by step in France, but every year the investigator were bringing all the civil parts and telling them how was going the investigations. So we were really part of the investigation, but we were not part of the trial because I'm still waiting for my trial. So hopefully there should be some changes due to the fall of the regime and proofs are coming out. But anyway, we had only a trial in 1999 in absentia that took 1 day, and where the victims were not heard. We were present, but didn't speak up. But in February 2002, from spectator, I became an actor of my life and the life in which I was dedicated with the victims of terrorism and the victims in general, but specifically on the victims of terrorism. In February 2002, I met in Paris one of the sons of Gaddafi, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi. I spoke with him, and I started a negotiation that took me 2 years in Libya, London, Paris, in which we tried to obtain something to show the responsibility of Libya in the terrorist attack. They offered a compensation, and after 2 years we obtained $170 million for the 170 victims. The amount was not important. What was important is that they signed a document, and I always told them, if you don't want to give money, just if Gaddafi goes on the public television and say we are responsible of the crime, then it would be okay. But receiving this money was a big challenge because we have to find all the relatives of the 170 dead victims. And it took me many years, 5 years in fact, to find all the relatives of each of the dead victims and to give his part of the $1 million. And then SOS Attentat decided to close the door in 2008. And everybody came to me and said, you should be the one taking over. I said, I think I've done enough. I'm a bit tired about all that. But there was a terrorist attack in Cairo where a young girl has been killed in February 2009. And then we decided to create the French Association for Victims of Terrorism. I was already in a network of associations. I was already part of the International Congress of Victims of Terrorism organized by Spain and Colombia. So we went on with that. And I stayed 30 years as the director of the French Association for Victims of Terrorism, giving support to the old victims, I would say, because there was no terrorist attack in the first years, but still there were victims. I remember the Ministry of Justice in France. I went to see her in December 2008 and told her if she would support the French Association if we create it, as they supported SOS Attentat before. And she told me, but there are no more victims of terrorism. can you imagine in the mindset of a minister, if there is not an immediate event, it means that there is no problem. It's just forgetting the victims from the terrorist attacks before. And there were many of them. Anyway, we started this association. We were a civil part in many terrorist attacks, but also with returnees and different events like that. More than 100 cases were followed by the association. And this is also to highlight a difference between the associations providing support to victims and the associations of victims that can provide support also. We have to work together, but because we are complementary, we need to be together because we are serving the same victims and with a different point of view. As we are civil parts, we can bring them to be part as a group and to prepare to the investigations or the lack of investigation, but also to the trials, because we are together with them. We have the support from the associations as a psychologists who are behind us, but we are with them in the trial as a civil part, together with them. It's different, and we are representing all the victims that could not, for any reason, be present in the trial. We don't replace them in the trial, but we are together with them, and we represent the one who don't have the possibility, for any reason, to be a civil part. And this is to show how being together can be very powerful. In fact, all know about the terrorist attacks that happened in 2014, 15, and 16 in France, all these terrorist attacks, and the huge ones also. There was a very big change in the support given to the victims when Juliette Meadel has been nominated as a Secretary of State for Victims' Assistance. Because we had many different guichets where we had to go, and then everything was centralized. And the thing she did, she brought us all together around the table, because there was a competition between us, because we were trying to have money from our states. So there was like a competition, and we are the real representative of the victims, or we are the one who are giving the best, providing the best support, and it was a big tension between all the different actors. She brought all together, and we worked to build a national coordinated system providing support to victims. And this was very important. She created also la Délégation interministérielle de l'aide aux victimes, which was an office with a professional doing the job on the ground, because she was at a political level. But it was important to have also an administration level, providing information to all the different state organizations, different ministers, but also with the NGOs, and we are all working together. This was very efficient. It was on the local level and a national level. And we could see for the latest terrorist attacks how it was very powerful. I remember Strasbourg, for example. All the system was thought about before, and 3 hours after the terrorist attack, it was placed, and we started with a crisis group in Strasbourg with all the different actors. So this is very, very important. But unfortunately, it happened because the trauma for the state was so big. What is good is that what has been created for the victims of terrorism has been implemented for all victims. And this is something that we can use because states have a double responsibility for victims of terrorism, because the target is the state itself. And for that reason, he has, of course, the obligation to provide support to all victims, including victims of terrorism. But in the case of the victims of terrorism, it's even more important because the state is the real target. And then, so that can be a way to push the governments to do something. But then it should be applied to all the victims. To conclude, it's very important that we have the vision on the needs on the short term, the crisis, the few months after, the years after, and the decades after. And the needs of the victims are not the same. It depends on the life of each victim, but there is a momentum where you should provide, and the leader that is together with the victim is not the same from the very beginning and the end. I would say the system shows that at the end, the associations of victims are the ones who are still in contact with the victims at the end. It doesn't mean that the other one should not be there, because if there is a problem, we should be able to come back in another position. But it's something, a graduation. It changes in the time. What I saw then, after the crisis, and now that it's getting better in France, is that we have the problem of funding now is getting more and more intense. And I think it's not only in France, it's everywhere. And unfortunately, we are losing the experience of all the professionals that were there during the hard time and could be very useful if something happens again. So I would say that the lesson learned as the Vice President of Europe, the four lessons is: do not wait for a crisis to build a national coordinated system for victims, including all actors, and specifically the NGOs, because they are the person on the ground that knows exactly the needs of the victims and know how to speak to the victims and create confidence with the victims. A state doesn't know how to do that, and it doesn't have the capacity and the situation to do that. This national coordinated system for victims should be maintained on both political and administrative level. I think the lack that we have, that we don't have now Juliette Meadel, a person on a political level. And we also have to build a long-term strategy to fund the NGOs and to be for them to be in a capacity to go over and to be active on the ground, because their experience, when we learned during a crisis, you learn many things. You learn it very quickly, but you do also a lot of mistakes because you don't have the former experience. It won't happen if the same person are still on place. And of course, you have to share the voice of the victims because they can inspire you and improve the efficiency of the support of the victims. It's a very powerful tool to speak to the politics. And we can also see how the voice of the victims in a trial can be very, very important. As soon as it's not a complaint, if it's just about what they feel and evidence of the way they were injured, and usually they tell the stories in a way that is inspiring. A lot of persons are afraid of the voice of the victims, and say, "Oh, the person is going to cry, and I will have to to give her support." No, usually the victims has a distance with the event, not at the at the beginning, but after a time, and can be very inspiring.
Thank you so much for that, Guillaume. I'm already being shown that the time's up, but I'm going to also, as Rosa said, I will first of all just see if there's anyone in the audience that would like to ask a question of Guillaume. I have 50 questions, but... Say again? 5-0, yes, because I always have questions. Maybe right at the beginning, you talked about the fact you didn't have support, you didn't have legal assistance, you didn't have compensation. Was it the coordination? Was it establishing a support service? Was it funding? What was the things, the 1, 2, 3 things that you feel really kind of made a difference for you, and which you feel over the years in France you still need to focus on or get right, and what you would recommend other countries to focus on?
It took time before the things changed, step by step, and then suddenly it was coordinated by Juliette Meadel. I think that, of course, everything can be improved, but because every time you hear of a specific case, you think, this should be.
Can everyone hear?
If you, you always have specific cases that you didn't think about before. That comes out, and with a new problem that we didn't think about. Is it an individual problem, or can it be more valuable for other victims? And then you have to change the thing. Being in a group where everybody share the experience and the specific cases, you can implement every new situation and to change the organization. If it depends on the law, change the law. If it depends on organization, change the organization. If it depends on coaching the person who are in front of the victims, coach the victim. I think now that the system in France should be a good example if it's maintained. And I say if it's maintained, because I have the feeling that it's going down a little bit. It could be implemented everywhere. But the way it has been constructed, I think, is the good way. Putting everybody around the table. There is no leader. Of course, there is a decision maker, which is the politics. But putting everybody around the table and working on individual cases and coming back on the experience every year, putting again on the table what are the new things that can be implemented is the good way to do it.
And can you just say something about the funding system? Because I think everyone keeps saying funding is a problem. But in France, you established a victim support fund, victim fund, which has legislation behind it and which is independent. I think that's important to talk about. Yeah,
it's specific to victims of terrorism, but it's also for other crimes. It's another fund, but it's the same system. It was very helpful because once the money problems are solved, you can take care of all the other problems. At the beginning, when it arrived, it was only a money problem, and nobody had any clue for the other things. And the only response was money. This is not acceptable. You have to have all the different response. But the fund guarantee now is working rather well because there is a judge that if you don't agree on the amount that has been given, you can go to justice in a very easy way to have a decision of a judge who is dedicated on compensation and can adjust or not the compensation. And you have 2 levels. If you don't agree again, anyway. So this is the way to change, because the fund guarantee was having only their own decision, and you couldn't change the decision of the fund guarantee. And it's really efficient because now the fund guarantee is getting a higher and higher compensation because it was too low. But anyway, it was important because for the victims, you have the charity of the fund guarantee giving money, but you don't want to have to fight against the hand who is helping you. But you have if you have the feeling that the compensation is not appropriate, what do? You go in a trial against the fund guarantee. That's very difficult, emotionally, because you're fighting not against the terrorist, but against the support that is given to you. So this had to be changed, and fortunately, it was one of the things that we highlighted with Juliette Meadel, and that's why we had the judge in the last decision.
Thank you for that, Guillaume. I know that we're over time, so I will end this conversation now. Are we having a video as well?
Yes, we can play the video now.
Okay, perfect. We have a short video which Guillaume provided for us about the memorial for the victims.
Thank you. In fact, that was 2007 when we went on the place. It's one of the hottest places in the desert, and we created this memorial with 140 persons. It was at 500 kilometers from the first town, and in the middle of the desert, and we had to carry everything with us. We stayed 1 month and a half. We even have goats that we were killing to feed us. And we had some cooks, we had some bakers, we had some mechanics. This is the wing that we used, one of the wing of the plane that we used for the memorial. And it was, there was a plate, and anyway, we did a plate with all the names of all the victims on it. Unfortunately, it has been destroyed 1 year ago by the Russians. As an act, anti-French. So now we have to wait for better time to rebuild it.
Thank you so much, Guillaume. That's been a really powerful testimony. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Do we have a little bit of patience? In 45 minutes we will break for lunch. But now I would like to invite to the stage a super dynamic, super creative moderator, Anthony Pemberton, who is representing KU Leuven University and also the city of the whole city of Amsterdam. Also, he is joined by the distinguished speakers, João Lazaro, who is the president of Victim Support Portugal, Lena Kaiser Aberg, Executive Director of Victim Support Finland, and Anna Dvidice, Team Leader at the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. And let's get started.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that, Marina, and also thank you very much for making me a representative of the whole town of Amsterdam now. Given the fact that I come from the southern part of the Netherlands, near Rotterdam, that's also a little bit difficult if anyone ever heard that. But I can imagine that you didn't really want to pronounce the terrible mouthful called the Netherlands Institute for the Study of Crime and Law Enforcement in Amsterdam, which I do actually represent. So yeah. I just wanted to say that I'm very happy to be able to be here with this distinguished panel, and also at this moment, the 35 years of Victim Support Europe, 35 years of European Victims Day, and 40 years of the UN Basic Declaration of Rights for Victims of Crime and Abuse of Power. And I know when I'm lecturing, I never get that right either. So I just basically say the UN Basic Declaration and hope that everyone will fill it in for me. But maybe I can also at this point also say that, that we're remembering things. For me, it's also 25 years in the business now. 25 years ago, I started as at the Dutch Bureau of Statistics, working on the Dutch victim survey, 25 years. And of course, throughout those years, things have changed. Unfortunately, some things have stayed the same as well. I mean, I think some of the things that Rosa was also saying, there's still challenges that we still have. Some of the things that Kaisa was saying as well. Kaisa was saying is that we still want better implementation. But one of the things that has definitely been a never-ending source of joy to see how much has changed is the people we're with here today. And I was looking through my own emails over the past 20 years, and I came across a document that said application for the Secretariat of the European Forum for Victim Services. And it's like a 7-page document about the kind of things that we wanted to do. but I don't think I ever could have imagined that that would become Victim Support Europe and all the excellent work that Alexander, Lev, and Marina, and all the others, the 30 others now are doing now. Okay, but that's just my personal reflection. I think that's one thing that we can definitely celebrate as a tremendous achievement over the past years. But now, to the history, and we're going to be learning from the history to look towards towards the future. And I'm looking at my my colleagues João, Lena, Kaisa, and Anna Arbery. I think I got that right. Yeah, yes, Albury. No, I didn't get it right. Yeah, it's always difficult with the name pronouncing. We're going to be talking about say the evolution of the start of the European Forum for Victim Service, Victim Support Europe, and the basic declaration. Then we see the evolution, how it went further, and we see the present challenges, and we think about the things we can do today. So, but back to the beginning, João. Maybe I can start with you. 35 years ago, there's a once upon a support. Yeah, can you take us back to how that was when we started with, say, a European network of victim service? What were the main challenges? What were the main ideas?
First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's really an honor, but I'm feeling old because I'm at this stage. We're talking about this that I'm invited to talk about history. So thank you for doing that, Victim Support Europe. But history is very important, namely in this kind of movements with all the new faces, new generation that will carry on our battles. But it's it's essential to learn and to know the story, and the story is begun in the very late 80s. With there was, as Algan mentioned, and there was this call. And I'm talking about him from Portugal, and as we learned, EPUV was founded in June of '99, and it was founded by a group of people and with the support of the Probation Institute. For the historical framework, the revolution has been in the transition for democracy in Portugal. Happened in 1974. So by the beginning of the 19th, the structure of a more modern state, of a democratic state, was being built, and the Probation Institute was founded in 1989, and then 1 year after was Victim Support. And Victim Support was, in terms of Portugal, EPUV. Was the first idea was having this public institute. You know how government loves to have organizations and directors, sub-directors, and all of that, layers of administrative, and sometimes they are really helpful, sometimes not. So, but it was a call that was embraced by civil society at the same time as the public administration, and there's a founder, there's a key person. It is more or less at the same time of Alan Reeves, of Mark, of Van Dyck, that his name still alive, Luís Miranda Pereira, who was by the time the president of the Probation Institute in Portugal, and was contacted by the Minister of Justice saying, we just received a letter here from someone. They want to build up a European movement, European organization, that the name, just for historical reasons, Victim Support Europe was not born as Victim Support Europe 35 years ago. Was born as European Forum for Victim Service, and turn on and change the name, and in a good way, for Victim Support Europe. So in that time, and the challenge was grabbed by Luís, and Luís got a group of people coming from the church, the law enforcement, judge, and they were the founders of an NGO, a national NGO called EPUV. At the same time, because this international view and this this approach of being better united, of sharing knowledge, of learning together, it is in the DNA of a POW from the very beginning. We start to work with the others. So first it was a very overseas kind of thing, very British kind of things, very structured, very vertical. And then it moved for a more informal, for a more peer association. And it's what we have today. And we have been able, together, in different phases, to support the ones that now they are in more troubled phases. We have always been, all of us more or less has been there, and to attract more and more people. It started, and for me it's a focus, as a platform of everyone that is doing service and cares for victims of crime, but it has born, and for me it's keen, as a platform of NGOs. Because, let's face it, the state agencies have their own agency, more or less supported by the money for the same money as the others. So, of course, and that's true, Kasia. So it's essential to be all together, but essential to think about the efforts and the strength that civil organizations give to society, namely during the times that are more challenged. So for me, it's essential, and it has been essential, and we have learned so much and to share so much all over these 35 years.
Yeah. So it's very much also a means of supporting victim support organizations, also through the hard times. I think that all the victim support organizations in the room will recognize that there's been challenges along the way. Good times have been followed by a little bit worse times, also when it comes to things like funding and organization-wise. Is that something that you also recognize from the beginning in Finland?
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. I think Joe said very wise words, and I think the tradition in Finland has been very much NGOs have a strong position in supporting people in vulnerable situation, because they are the people, they are the organizations that can reach out to people on the grassroots level, and this is what we are talking about, those people that are in a weak situation. And our history dates from, actually it started in 1993 with it was like a committee on equality affairs based on like a governmental, but NGOs participated it, and it was clear evident there that there didn't exist any kind of support system for victims of crime. There were shelters, yes, but not to support victims of crime, and within this committee the idea started, and NGOs then as a collaboration of big NGOs in Finland, such as the Finnish Red Cross, big child welfare unions, shelter unions, and NGOs like this, together with the Finnish Lutheran Church, took the initiative and started the organization Victim Support Finland, RIKU, and officially started in 1994. So we just celebrated last year our 30th anniversary. And it started practically that still today we are not, there is not a legal entity called RIKU. We are not an association, but we are a joint union of these big NGOs. There are 5 of them, and the church is still involved today. And also this was the way it was possible to develop this service to become national from a very, very small initiative. I mean, in the beginning, there wasn't any funding. It's really interesting that it was actually a national a police TV that gathered in a collection the first funds together with the Ministry of Interior in 1994, and it was only in 1995 that RIKU started to get more stable funding from the so-called Slot Machine Association. So our funding came for many decades from people playing gaming, and that's a system how you fund NGOs, social welfare NGOs. Today it's changed now our funding system, but together, these NGOs coming together, it was possible to step by step build the network of people working for RIKU all over the country. It started so that people would be working like 20% doing RIKU work, 80% of crisis help in like a crisis center, an NGO based. And this is how it started and evolved, so that today we have over 20 local services all over the country. We have like 60, 70 people working all over the country. And still these NGOs are there to back. And in difficult situations, like with funding we've had, like last year, it was really important to have these big NGOs there to support and do their advocacy as well. So we see a real big value in having all this NGO-based support in our work.
Yeah, I'm hearing that the NGO part is really important, and also the connection to large national NGOs. But before I start bringing in the perspective from the United Nations, what would you say was from the beginning, say, the added value of also having that European component, Leanna?
Sorry.
Yeah.
The European component was extremely important. I actually contacted my predecessor, Petra Chelman, who many of you remember, and she remembered all the visiting the European Forum for Victim Services conferences and having Helen Reeves to come to Finland and tell about victim services, because there wasn't a tradition in our country on that. So we really had to learn. Of course, we had to learn. The Nordic countries were really important, so we looked at Sweden. The Swedish Brottsofferjouren was really important to support us, and then all these models visiting different countries, and the forum was really important in bringing this information together and giving us, the paths to go and learn from other countries, and also to have these important people like Helen Reeves to come to Finland and talk. It was really important to sort of give a status to victim support issues, which were not at the table. It wasn't a political issue. They were not on the agenda then. So gradually, through the European network and through the European sort of status on this issue, we also were, or the predecessors were able to take this as an important thing to develop in our country.
I think that's a really important point. So that the fact that you're working together as a European group, that also means you can call in support from other countries, or from, like you say, important people like Dame Helen Reeves, to make to raise the level of on the public agenda of what victim services are about. Also by pointing to good practices elsewhere. I think that's tremendously important. Now to bring Anna into the conversation. So, what's your take on the way that the UN Basic Declaration featured into that? What's the role that's been in this international victims movement?
Thank you so much, and thank you to Victim Support Europe, Lev and the team, the Commission. I want to say first, I think that what I've seen, and I wasn't there in Victim Support Europe 35 years ago, but what I've seen and I've really appreciated with Lev's leadership and with the others who are here is really not to stop at the borders of Europe. I think a lot of European institutions and processes are only looking inwards, and in fact, we cannot do that, and there's always something to learn, and there's always something to share with other countries. And also, of course, victims are not stopping at the border. So Europeans are victims outside of Europe, and we have cases now where all regions will be involved in the same case, with online victimization in particular. So to go back to the Declaration of Basic Principles of Justice for Victims of Crime and Abuse of Power, which is really interesting, I would really encourage you to read it or reread it if you haven't, because in fact I think it's extremely relevant still and extremely strong, and it can actually, we'll go to whether we can update it or not, but I think it's there and it has really strong principles. And what I want to say here is that, as we've heard already from all the nice stories and memories, that this work, like all of the work of human rights, international law, is the work of people, individuals. And just as, our work doesn't stop at a border, the people that were involved, I think, in the UN processes were often the same, or part of the same, that were involved in some of the work here in Europe. So you've mentioned already Jan van Dijk, Mark Grönhuizen. I met them when I was extremely young, starting at the UN. But I also met someone else who at the time I didn't really realize how much of a historical figure she was, and that was Irene Mellop. Irene Mellop, and I really liked seeing that when I read about her a bit more now, because she really resonates with a lot of the people who are here. Irene Mellop was born in Poland in 1925, so we also celebrate her, what would have been her 100th anniversary this year, of a Russian Jewish family. So she left Poland at some point in the 30s, but of course she lost a lot of her family members to the Holocaust. And here it also resonates with my personal history, because my grandmother was also born in Poland at the time, from a German-Ukrainian family. She was no longer Polish after the war because borders had moved, right? And in the similar, I think 1924 she was born. So I think, when Irene Mellop then, became a lawyer in New York and worked at the UN, what was then the UN Crime Prevention Office, I think they were called at the time, still in New York. Of course, she was coming with the history of the Holocaust and the mass victimization. And I think, of course, these movements here, we're talking about the 70s, the 90s, but we're also building on that history of trauma and what we learned about not only individual, collective, but also intergenerational trauma. And that we've also seen, and we see still in many other parts of the world. So when I started working at the UN, Irene Mellop was long ago retired, but one of these people who didn't give up. So we would see this really old lady with I think her glasses, she kept them since the 80s. So if you remember these big glasses that people had in the 80s. And she would come in randomly to someone's office, she couldn't see very well, and ask for, where is the office of Jan van Dijk or something like this. And we didn't know who this person was. So I think afterwards, when I heard about, these publications in memory of Irene Mellop, the mother of the declaration and so on, I was like, wow, this is really history here in my office. So anyways, she was one of sort of the strong people behind the UN declaration. And another person who was already involved then, he must also have been extremely young, was Professor Irvin Waller from Canada, who is still teaching as far as I can see. So they were interestingly working at the request of the UN Congress on Crime Prevention, Criminal Justice that took place in Caracas, Venezuela in 1980, on a text for something on victims of crime. Interestingly, Irene's focus was on victims of abuse of power, while Irvin had worked on a draft on victims of crime. And therefore, they ended up having a draft that was, went through several processes and became this Declaration of Victims of Crime and Abuse of Power. And I think it's interesting because they had that separation, but in fact, a lot of the issues are the same, and the needs of victims will be the same. And I think we see that today as well, that we've developed into different areas of law: international human rights law, international humanitarian law, criminal law, victimology, in between all of this, right? Or I think, in fact, there is a lot of links, and often we're very much, as lawyers, those of us who are lawyers, putting these things in silos, while in fact the needs of the people are the same. And many, actually, victims can be both, I would say. I was thinking about some, specific groups of victims, say victims of police violence. You can put them probably under both, or victims of corruption. If corruption is a crime, is a victim of crime. If not, it's a victim of an abuse of power, possibly. So, yeah, the declaration, I would recommend to read it again. And I think the other thing that is important with this text, as compared to binding instruments like the directives, is that it is soft law. So therefore, adopted by consensus, it can go further in a way because you don't have to negotiate. Well, they do negotiate, but you're able to be a little bit more, innovative or going a bit further. So I think that's sort of my general points on this. So I think that there isn't actually a separation really between the European processes and the UN processes. And I would really call on more connections now that we are also facing these challenges globally that we're facing. Thank you.
I think that's this an incredibly important point as well. The extent to which sometimes our knowledge of victims and our approaches to victims have been very siloed. That we keep reinventing a wheel for different groups of victims, and I think that's one of the things that Victim Support Europe. And also, like Kasia was saying, the horizontal working of the European Victims Directive has been important in suggesting that connection. But one of the things that I also think that you're highlighting is the importance of thinking about victims of crime and abuse of power in the same breath, so to speak, even though most of the people working now in the area of victims of abuse of power will be more familiar with, say, with the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court than, say, with the Victims Directive. And maybe there should be more osmosis there as well. And maybe it's a general idea that the kind of things that we can learn from each other, not only cross-border, as we were discussing, but also from different types of victims, and also maybe from large-scale victimization. There's still much that there's much to do there, I think. Okay, but no, we had a little bit of a looking back to say the beginning, and now I want to bring the past to a little bit towards the present. Yeah. So what would you say as well as what's the main evolution? We had grassroots in the beginning of the 1990s. The European Union wasn't involved yet. And now we move towards through the framework decision towards the EU directive. What is your take on this evolution? It's a big question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's a big while. It's by definition it has been an evolution.
Yeah.
So the path has been difficult. But now I believe we know what we want. Just allow me for national pride to say there's a Portuguese fingerprint on it. It was with the Lisbon Treaty that this kind of approach at the European level was possible, and the predecessor of the directive was the framework on victims' rights, and was the initiative of a Portuguese presidency, I believe the first one, or the second Portuguese presidency, back in 2011, I believe. Yeah. So for us has been always important, and in a way, we as the National Organization for Victim Support, APAV, we had played a very important role in this moment. It was, for instance, at that time was the Minister of Justice, and it was Luís Miranda Pereira, was the founder of APAV, that was working for the government at the Minister of Justice level, who convinced the minister that it was a good thing to do, to look for the victims. So saying that for historical reasons, and I'm very proud, coming from Portugal, coming from the Portuguese Victim Support, to say that it's important to have a combination of NGOs and non-governmental. Saying that, we have so much to go through, and the importance of having this kind of, and the government must be very aware of how important is the check and balance mechanism, and to keep victim support independent. So that's why this sometimes of this government coordination, sometimes it's too state-owned. And victim support organization, there's a huge risk of being just accessorized on the system.
Mm-hmm.
And by the end, everyone is doing victim support, and it's not. Everyone must be victim-centered, which is completely different of being doing victim support. So this collective and collaborative approach is essential, but is essential to have in mind that this kind of approach, that it's more for me, it's more focused on steering groups of coordination, of joint forces between the NGOs, the law enforcement, and the state coordination to drive this to be more coordinated. For me, as European level, there's a lot of battles.
Yeah.
We are just a start of a new era, and we don't know where we are going through, right? So let's face it, with all the challenge of safety and security, victims tend to be not the first priority. They can be in the political speeches, but as the other one says, put the money where your mouth is. So let's face and let's see, with all the negotiation for the new financial framework. But saying that, and because don't get the wrong idea that I'm not a collaborative guy, I do believe in a European model. And what I have been talking about, it's the natural diversity of opinions of a collaborative process. So we have shown by all the European path that we have been walking through, namely with directive, there's some kind of European model for this. And for some years we were looking, is there any European particularity in what we are doing? And we know we know for sure now there are. So it's like Jose was saying, stick together. There's a lot of obstacles, and we need the support of more progressive governments, and welcome to the new winds from Poland. That will be very important, because let's face it, we are going to be the odds are against us in a way. So it must be a lot of perverse,
yeah,
and work to do.
Yeah.
So leadership, and it's what sometimes the national members will look at European level, at the Victim Support Europe, and leadership, as we have been doing, Jose is doing right now. It's very important, because people need, and the fighters in each country and the advocates in each country need to see there's a common goal, and there's a strategy, as Ross was saying.
Yeah, I suddenly realized that you were saying perseverance, and I tried to paraphrase that as perverse, and that's something completely different. But it's perverse to make perseverance into perversity. But it's no, but but at the same time, you're also emphasizing the importance of being collaborative as victim support organizations, but maintaining independence to ensure also. To ensure that, I think that's one of the ways that soft law often works, that watchdogs in countries can actually use that soft law to make things work. I was also thinking, João had a number of things he's proud of from the history in Portugal, and of course the tremendous role that the Portuguese have played also in Europe. What were your main success stories over there?
Oh, so many success stories, where to choose. But I'm thinking of the history of RICO combined to developments in Europe and the EU Victims' Rights Directive. It's really interesting because when I started in RICO 11 years ago, it was just the time when the directive was going to be implemented. Okay, so these great people have been working for over 20 years, had developed this structure, the network, and the knowledge, and all the contents. They recruited the volunteers. The volunteers were trained. They were very devoted, enthusiastic. So everything was there, instead of enough funding. And we knew the victims were there, but we didn't reach out for them because there wasn't enough resources to do that. So then comes the Victims' Rights Directive, is implemented, and the government takes responsibility for the funding, and Riku's funding starts growing. And the first thing what was amazing for me is when I came from outside, and I actually had a background in migration issues, and suddenly I have this directive, which is actually exactly the same, Articles 8 and 9 about victim support that we had been doing and developing. So it was actually, grew up from grassroots work supporting victims, and I thought that's really beautiful. So we didn't actually, when the directive was implemented, and the government, the Ministry of Justice, gave us they gave us this public obligation to implement these services. We actually didn't need to change the way we worked. So of course that also shows how active NGOs were in creating Victims' Rights Directive. And then through the development of funding, the number of clients we've been able to serve has actually grown 6 times bigger in 10 years.
Wow.
So in 14-15 it was around 5,000, and now we have around 31,000.
Wow.
Which of course tells that the people are those are in need of the services are there.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, a success story. And I hope we're going to talk about challenges, because we do have them. But I really think one of the things that still we need to work on is like the deputy minister said, that we need to help the weakest. And I think that's still the challenge, that we don't reach out to the weakest victims. Still, some we do, but not all. And that's really a challenge, because those people who know about, because of course it's a lot about public information about our services. Okay, it's cooperation with the authorities, the police referring, but how do we reach out to those peoples in the margins, the minorities, the undocumented migrants, and this? And I think that's still something we really have to work on, and I hope that will be the next success story. But still, I think it's been a great development over these 31 years.
Fantastic. So the fact that the directive actually reflected the work that was already happening is, I think, testament to, say, the knowledge that went into the directive, and how much the directive actually reflected, say, victimological knowledge and knowledge from victim support at that time. And of course, like you say, the 6 times, got that right, 6 times the amount of people serviced. But maybe, and one of the difficulties, the challenges you're already foregrounding, is that might also leave out the people that are most difficult to reach. I think that's something that I think a lot of other organizations would also share. Well, there are a number of things I want to ask you, Anna. Now, maybe one of the first things is what kind of inspiration can we, say, as Europeans, and I know that's a little bit difficult at the moment. What kind of inspiration can we get from elsewhere in the world? We seem to be increasingly bit isolated from the rest of the world, if I switch on the news every morning. But what kind of inspiration can we get from, say, other parts of the world, would you say?
Thank you. I think it's a question of mindset as well. I don't think we are separated. Maybe we make ourselves separated. And as a European, I would wish that Europeans look more outside and learn from many different parts of the world, where probably resources might be more limited, but innovation is much more active. And, social justice movements have been strong. So I think one example that I wanted to mention, and I hear you, and I totally agree with the importance of civil society and the victims movement being independent, but at the same time we also have other models. And I think, for instance, when it comes to legal assistance, looking at the public defenders model in Latin America is really strong. Doesn't do everything. It's like everywhere else, the resources are limited and so on, but including the fact that in certain countries there are specialized public defenders for victims, specialized units that look into, for instance, human rights abuses. So I think that's one interesting example, and Latin America for sure has a lot that we can learn from. Another initiative that is happening with actually between Ibero-America, so also Spain and Portugal are part of that, is a development of a convention on access to justice. It's the first time I've I mean, I think it's the first initiative globally. So again, very interesting because the access to justice umbrella from the SDGs, you know, this is what we are, all countries have committed to reaching certain goals, including equal access to justice for all. And one of the indicators is about victims reporting and the support they receive. And I heard before the FRA numbers, the global numbers are not better. I mean, most victims do not report. And if they report often, you know, their experience is not good. So that's the access to justice work, I think, is something that has also been inspired by a lot of the victims' work. And it's interesting because I think it moves away from sort of this risk of putting either the rights of the offenders, accused, or the rights of victims, and actually looking at all individuals. Also because, as we know, sometimes people may be classified as offenders, but they were victims, or they're both. So that's one angle. And I think in terms of innovation, for sure, around the use of technology, we see a lot of innovation around the world. Risks, of course, and we know, and I think Europe has a very strong leadership position on making sure that use of technology is in line with human rights, privacy, and other rights. And I think some of the sort of one-stop center approaches can also be looked at from other parts of the world, whether it's South Africa on victims of domestic violence, and in general, or other parts of the world where with these desks for victims of gender-based violence and so on. So I think, yeah, for sure there's much to be learned, and I would really encourage people to be involved and to do it on a very equal basis. So we don't have anything more than anyone else to teach others. We need to, you know, move away from that approach that we've had for a long time.
So I think that's a lot of really inspiring ideas. I think I'm very much taken by the idea that you should seek out as much knowledge from other areas of the world as possible. And a number of the examples you gave, maybe I can pick up one and then ask a follow-up question on that. You're suggesting that there's an Iberian convention on access to justice, which I think is a very, very interesting idea, and also very much like the way that might be able to combine the difficulties facing suspects and offenders and those facing victims in different parts of the world. But that does also bring to mind another thought. What can the UN? Will the UN be able to update the basic declaration? And I know that's one thing that's been recurring over the past 40 years, whether there will be a UN convention on the rights of victims. Is that something that we might be able to look forward to?
Thank you. Well, the UN, so I'm part of the Secretariat. We report to member states, so we don't make those decisions. That is a decision that is made by member states. So, of course, I think this, again, talking about the European model and the leadership, this is where the European countries, if they think this is something that is helpful, they need to engage in the UN processes. And yeah, whether it's the EU presidencies or the broader European countries. In terms of updating the declaration, which is a so-called soft law, I don't personally think that this is the moment for trying to update standards. We have had other processes recently in the global space, at least. We've had other processes that have been very difficult and where we see a high risk of lowering the standards, in fact, because of the, because of many different aspects. I mean, most recently on very, concepts that we all thought were cast in stone are being challenged, right? And in terms of the convention, yes, this is also something that was very much pushed by the same group of people in Vienna and in New York and in Geneva in the 90s, and then the idea sort of, disappeared. What I think is interesting is to see that there's been a number of conventions adopted, entering into force, that have taken part of the language. So the UN Convention on Transnational Organized Crime, the UN Convention on Corruption, most recently the UN Convention on Cybercrime. It has a longer title, by the way, which I don't know, but it's was adopted by the General Assembly in December, and all of those do have victims language. Also, of course, the ICC statute. And there is also, of course, the other convention that is being developed on crimes against humanity. So I think, I'm not sure that there would be the space politically for a transversal convention, but I think pushing the topic within other spaces and within other processes, other conventions and so on, it makes perfect sense. And that can really move things forward in implementation.
Yeah, so essentially, I think the message there is, again, try also to look at what else is happening and see what we can bring on board from that. And that's generally a very wise idea. We're being signaled that we're rapidly running out of time, and I do really want to hear from both of you what your main current challenges, current challenges that you see, and what you see a little bit for the future. I'm not sure how quickly you can give us. I know it's a big question, Lena. Maybe one big challenge, and what do you hope for the future? Could you say something about that?
Well, I already mentioned the challenge of reaching out to all victims. I think that's number one. But of course, it means that we need resources and stable funding resources. I think that's really something. So, and EU legislation is really, really crucial. We've seen it in our country, in Finland, that strong EU legislation, in combination, of course, with other human rights law that deals with victims, like the Istanbul Convention, has had a really, really important role as well, practically. On developing the specialized services. So I think that's one of the challenges, and I think I'm really hopeful, and I hope looking for the negotiations on the EU Victims Directive, and I want to raise up court-based support. I think that's something new, and that's a way we can reach out to those victims that never heard about our services. That's like the last moment for them to get advice and help. We've seen that practically when we've had a little bit of that kind of service in the courts, and we have young victims coming there, and they have no idea of what their rights are. They have no idea what happens in the court, in the trial. So I think that's really, really something. I hope that will go forward in the negotiations.
Okay, fantastic. So court-based support, and in addition to trying to, target the more difficult to reach victims. So
I will play along with definitely court-based and I would say judiciary-based support. That includes police, law enforcement as well. But for me, it's in a broader view, is to look at victim support as one essential pillar of the justice system, of how we used to say here in Brussels many years ago, of internal affairs and justice approach. So not only one pillar that sometimes is there, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's mentioned, it's just accessorized, but one pillar. We have courts, you have law enforcement, you have to have the victim support, And that will bring the challenge if the state wants to control that, because they don't control the courts. Sometimes they try, right? We know that. But and for citizens, it's essential to have trust in what we do as victim supporters. We have to be seen not serving anyone else but the victims, and that's for the independence is essential. It's crucial for what we do.
Yeah, fantastic. So the part of it is ensuring that victim support is not an additional extra, something that we can that can be used as a kind of aspiration that we can throw around a little bit when people want to make a point about something else. They say, well, we're also going to be paying attention to the victims, but a real tangible, independent victim support that can act as a, and that's not something that can is an add-on, but it's something that is as fundamental to the working of our justice systems as our judiciary. Okay, I think we are really running rapidly. Oh, 2 minutes. So now, yeah, you go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Just very quickly, because I wanted to make 2 more points in challenges and also what to look at from outside also the region. I think one topic that comes up a lot globally is environmental crime and victims of environmental crime. And again, we're going beyond this sort of individualized approach, and we're looking at collective rights and communities. And the other point that I wanted to mention, obviously I quickly said something, but I think really the online space and the victimization, which we cannot look at from a country or even regional approach. And just to encourage everyone to get involved also in the forthcoming Crime Congress that will take place in Abu Dhabi in 2026. So this movement should contribute to those discussions, because as you said, I mean, if we want to have advances in declarations and things, we really count on regions that push human rights, rule of law, and inclusion, leaving no one behind.
Fantastic. Yes, so I think that's also a really good way of bringing everything else that's been said together. The issues of environmental crime and cybercrime necessitates that cross-national way of working. Victims will become a victim in one country from something that has happened, or an offender that is in another country, and will necessitate the work that we've been doing for the past 35 years together in Europe, that we continue doing that. So, and I think we've got our work cut out for us. But I think you will be able to join me in thanking our panelists for giving us a lot of things to think about, and a really great insight into how the past can also still give us a lot of good ideas for the future.
We would like to invite you for a collective action of having lunch all together. And for our online speakers, we will reconvene in 45 minutes at 12:45 for one more brief panel, but the most important probably because it's dedicated to the revision of the Victims' Rights Directive and the future of victims' rights. Thank you very much. We are starting with our next panel, writing the next chapter, reforming the Victims' Rights Directive. And I'm pleased to welcome our Deputy Director, Alexandra Ivankovich, on stage, who is going to moderate our panel session, as well as our distinguished speakers, panelists. I will start with Sławomir Buźma, Justice Counsel at the Permanent Representation of the Republic of Poland to the European Union. And now, coming on stage, just in time, Katarzyna Janicka-Pawlowska, Coordinator for Victims' Rights at the Commission, and Levent Altan, Executive Director of Victim Support Europe. But before we begin, let's watch a brief video in which European NGOs share their thoughts on why the revision of the directive is important for specific groups of victims. Please enjoy the video.
For us at the European Sex Worker Rights Alliance, it's very important and quite urgent that the Victims' Rights Directive is revised in order to make sure that any victims of crime can access justice in Europe. This is currently not the case for sex workers, who most of the time don't report crimes to the authority. One of the main reasons is the fundamental lack of trust between sex worker communities and the police and other authorities, including the justice system, to be fair.
The Victims' Rights Directive has been a key document for the development of restorative justice in the member states. Since its adoption, A lot happened in the field of restorative justice, and in the last year there is an increasing attention and interest coming from the policymakers to develop restorative justice. We very much support the revision of the Victims' Rights Directive to strengthen the rights of the victims in Europe and to strengthen the access to restorative justice services.
Well, justice should be more child-friendly. Justice systems in Europe should ensure that children victims of crimes are really heard, protected, identified, that the facts are established, that perpetrators are held accountable, and that children do not undergo any secondary victimization due to the procedure itself. The Child-Friendly Justice European Network supports a revision of the directive that would ensure that no child is left behind and that every child with their specific needs are taken into account. Crimes are really heard, protected, identified, that the facts are established, that perpetrators are held accountable, and that children do not undergo any secondary victimization due to the procedure itself. The Child-Friendly Justice European Network supports a revision of the directive that would ensure that no child is left behind and that every child with their specific needs are taken into account.
Persons with disability are at higher risk of crime than persons without disabilities. This is even more the case for women with disabilities, victims of violence, persons with intellectual or psychosocial disabilities, persons with multiple disabilities, and also persons living in institutions more generally. In addition to that, persons with disability are less protected due to discrimination, lack of access, and less of knowledge of their rights. So a stronger, more ambitious directive would lead to better rights for all, but also stronger implementation in the European Union countries, which is something currently lacking.
I think we can stop here. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tim Chapman. I'm speaking on behalf of the European Forum for Restorative Justice. And we're very happy to support VSE's video campaign on the EU Victims' Rights Directive revision. When you're a victim of crime, you are the victim of another person's abuse of power. They inflict harm on you without any consent or choice. And the suffering that you experience goes far beyond any material loss or physical injury you might experience at the time of the crime. But then, if you are in a group that is already excluded from power, that is already discriminated against and stereotyped, that is already in a vulnerable position in society, such as members of the LGBTQ+ community, such as people with disabilities, such as women, such as victims of trafficking, such as minoritized ethnic groups. If you're a member of one of those groups and you experience a crime, the impact is multiplied, because it's not just an instrumental or opportunistic event from the perpetrator's point of view. They've chosen you because of who you are and what you represent to them. And this means that it's a deep violation on who you are, your identity, which is really important to you. It also makes you feel socially isolated. You look around for support from others, and quite often it's not there. You feel very much alone, and you're very aware of your vulnerability within society. And for this reason, it is particularly important that such people who are already marginalized and excluded in society have the opportunity to have their dignity restored after they've been a victim of crime. to have solidarity with the rest of society restored, to have the injustice undone in a fair process, and to have the truth told, to have the inaccuracies about who they are corrected, that there was no justification for the crime, that it was based on prejudice and lies. This is why the revision of the Victims Directive is so important. This is why victims' rights are so important. Thank you very much.
Well, I will thank the colleagues who took the time to also send their messages, because obviously Victims' Rights Directive is important not just to Victim Support Europe, but to a number of other organizations that are looking towards the EU institutions and are very curious about the outcome of the famous trilogues. I guess the audience will not be surprised to hear that there is a revision of the Victims' Rights Directive being discussed at the moment, and that we are all having quite some expectations from it, and I'm very, very happy to have the distinguished panel here. So as Marina already announced, we have Sławomir Buczma from the Polish Permanent Representation, we have Kasia Janicka-Pawlowska from the European Commission, and we also have our very own Levent Altan, and I'll be happy to moderate this discussion. And we'll start with these. What is going on at the moment with the dialogues? What are the opportunities and challenges that the co-legislators are facing, and then also how Victim Support Europe is trying to influence this discussion? So I would maybe like to ask Sławomir first to tell us something from the point of view of the Polish presidency.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me. Indeed, there is something, but not that much, unfortunately, to be spread. We are in the so-called trialogue phase, meaning that we have both positions of the European Parliament adopted. Parliament adopted its report, as well as the Council did the same in the form of the general approach. What does it mean in reality? The first step is always the Commission's proposal for the amendments, in this case to the directive of 2012. And then once the proposal is sent to both co-legislators, they start working on their position on the amendments. In this case, as I mentioned before, we already collected the position both of the Council and of the Parliament, and now we are trying to come closer to each other with respect to certain provisions. Sometimes this is a matter of the language. We try simply to explain what is behind a specific provision of both co-legislators. So it's a matter of the language and a matter of understanding to find a compromise. Sometimes the differences are much how to put it, more time-consuming, heavier in terms of the matter under discussion. I'm sure we will have an opportunity to mention at least few of them, and I'm speaking here under control of Kasia, who is also a participant of this process, because you need to know that the co-legislators are accompanied by the European Commission, that acts as an honest broker to support both sides in reaching the compromise. And we specifically rely on the expertise and the drafting proposals coming from the Commission, as the Commission collects also specific information related to the implementation of the directive of 2012, how specific institutions were transposed into national law, how they work or why they do not work. Hence, as the reflection, I guess, of that picture is the proposal to revise this directive. Perhaps I shouldn't say too much, but looking at the first questions, if I may take them at the beginning while having the floor, is to present what is the intention of the Polish presidency, which may explain my presence here. First of all, it's we decided to consider the revision of this directive as our flagship, as the top priority, which may explain first of all, the position of the Polish government to put an individual in the center of the cooperation between the member states on a new focus on rights of individuals. The EU legislation has tackled for a decade or more basically with all these instruments that aim at facilitating judicial and police cooperation, whereas rights of individuals were tackled to a lesser extent after all these directives adopted, first of all, to enhance the position of the suspects and accused in criminal proceedings, and long after the adoption of the directive of 2012 on victims' rights. The intention, I would say, is very well proved, and I'm an evidence for that, because personally I had the pleasure to cooperate with Levent on the directive in 2011. Different roles, different stages of the negotiations. Nevertheless, I would say, and I would like to praise great cooperation that led finally to the adoption at the council level of the general approach under the Polish presidency back in 2011. Then, of course, that was sent to the European Parliament, and the co-legislator under the Danish presidency reached the final compromise. Now we're in a little bit different situation. We have all the positions of the Council and the Parliament, and we do our best simply to find compromises between the position of both co-legislators. You should stop me, otherwise I will talk too much.
Well, I'm just happy to know that the Danish presidency is still waiting in case you don't manage to push it through. They'll have your back, huh?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So, Kasia, what, from the Commission's perspective, what do you see as main opportunities, maybe obstacles? What are the challenges that the Commission sees? Because obviously we see that there's a difference between the version of the document that the Commission originally put forward and the one that's being discussed today. So how do you see that going back to the starting position, maybe?
Thank you, Alexandra. Indeed, the negotiations are challenging, and it is because of the diverging position from the co-legislators. As you know, the report from the European Parliament is very favorable of the Commission's proposal for the revision, sometimes even going farther, sometimes even in the Commission we believe too far when it comes to reaching the limits of what is feasible in terms of the proportionality and necessity, and also in terms of the legal basis of what we can do within the revision of the Victims' Rights Directive. So, of course, the more ambitious proposal for strengthening the victims' rights, the better. This is our position. Nonetheless, also as the guardian of the treaty, we need to make sure that we stay within the legal framework that is acceptable. Having said that, I also mentioned it earlier, we improve victims' rights not only with legislative changes, but also non-legislative actions. And following the adoption of this revision of the Victims' Rights Directive, we will work on the next EU strategy on victims' rights. So personally, I believe that there will be elements that may be left over from the negotiations somehow, which the co-legislator, not the Commission, the co-legislator, they are deciding. We are there only, to support. Will decide that there are indeed better placed elsewhere than in the EU Legislative Act. And then when it comes to the position of the Council, it is not a secret that the Commission has been very much disappointed with the general approach of the Council, the positions expressed by the Member States last summer. Several very important provisions have been deleted, including the provision on legal remedies, the provision on compensation, very important, the provision on facilitating access to justice for irregular migrants, a few other provisions also very important for us, have been substantially diluted when it comes to the level of ambition. So our approach to these negotiations is, of course, to support the co-legislators as much as we can, but for the moment we are standing behind what we have originally proposed. Having said that, we are of course there to facilitate the negotiations, and during the discussions, and sometimes there are really very detailed discussions, everyone is learning. And we really do have a very good approach to these discussions. I think one thing can be said about these negotiations, I have briefly mentioned it yesterday, there is an overall agreement to have ambitious revision of the Victims' Rights Directive from both the Parliament but also the Council. It's indeed important. So we are really working with a goodwill towards the best possible solutions for victims, without, however, undermining the often rightful concerns also from the member states when it comes to budgetary restrictions or legislative restrictions. So for the moment, the Commission is standing behind what we have originally proposed. Our intention is to bring back to the text of the Victims' Rights Directive the provisions on compensation and several other provisions, but we are also realistic, and we know that maybe these provisions will need some different different approaches. Maybe there will be some out-of-the-box ideas that will allow us to achieve the same level of ambition, the same level of improvements of victims' rights, of situation of victims in practice, while coming up with something that maybe will be lighter, easier for the member states to accept and to accept this as a binding legal obligations from which they will be afterwards scrutinized and verified by the European Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you for your optimism. So let's hear now what is Victims Support Europe doing, and how is Victims Support Europe also trying to support this process?
So I think we started before any others in thinking about this. I think we started when some member states were still implementing or transposing, let's say, the Victims' Rights Directive. We started in 2018 with the Vociari project, which was looking at the implementation in all, at the time, 27 member states. Because we knew that we needed the data, and I was just talking to Joanna from the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, and data is essential to achieving change. And we needed to know what was going on, whether it's happening, and we have the FRA surveys, but we needed our own research on the practical implementation of the directive. So it started way back then. Over the years, we've been doing evidence collection and research and understanding what's needed and how you need to change. That's then resulted in policy solutions. Most of the things that need to be done, we know how to do it, and we've known how to do it for a long time, the fundamentals. And we have now 5, 6, 7 policy papers. You saw them earlier. We've got a policy paper on the National Victim Support Framework, safe justice, data protection, communications framework, how to fund services. So when people tell me we don't have the money, it's not true. You're just not planning to have the money. The funding can be put in place, the systems can be put in place to fund any of these services if you have a strategic framework. So we've been working out those solutions and policy frameworks, and then in the last 18 months, 12 months, it's really been down to advocacy. And when we talk about VSE, we're talking about our 80 members. We're talking about our network of partners. You saw some of them there. And we're talking about our office working with our partners in the European Commission. Kasia, the EC coordinator for victims' rights, is a critical element in achieving change. For the first time, we've had a single person in the European Commission focused on this at an important level, and not only on human trafficking or on children, and working with the presidency and other presidencies. So we've been working with them, with the European Parliament. We have on our website a model provisions paper. We have the advantage that we have members who work with governments. I've worked in the European Commission, so we know how to draft European legislation as well. So we have drafted our proposals And that, I think, has influenced a lot what the European Parliament is saying. And I think what's important about all of this is that the directive, a lot of the things we're asking for in the directive are not new things. It's trying to make sure that what is already required is properly implemented, because we see a gulf in the implementation where there are member states like in the Netherlands or France, as we heard yesterday in the conference, that have done huge amounts and didn't have to do much more to implement the directive. But there are other countries such as Bulgaria, Romania, Greece, and we don't name them, and I've started naming them, but I will name them because it's so many years now. They do not have a victim support service that serves all victims of crime. And they haven't had, and they should have. And part of the reason that they don't is because the directive doesn't say these services should exist, and it doesn't say that they should be accessible and what accessible means. And so when the Commission tries to assess, they don't have any legal means to enforce. So we're not asking for lots of new things. We're asking to make sure that the directive is clear about the things that already should be in place but haven't been put in place for 10 years. So that's a big part of what we're doing at the moment. And then before I go on too long, I can talk about the challenges and priorities afterwards, maybe.
Those were none of these were challenges. Thank you. And I think, well, Levi already mentioned, and there was some mention around that as well previously around sectorial legislation. So there has been a lot of focus of the co-legislators and European Commission working on specific topics of groups of specific types of crimes. How does that play out in respect of the adoption of the Victims' Rights Directive? So how do you reconcile the specialist and the all crime view, and what do you see might be challenges or again opportunities from like more general approach in comparison with the specific approach? So maybe this time we start with Kasia.
Okay. Yes. The main difference between what should be placed in the Victims' Rights Directive that is applicable to all victims of all crimes and the provisions in relation to support and protection of victims of particular types of crime lies in the specific needs of victims of particular categories of crime. So we believe that we should always look into what is so special about the victims of terrorism, for instance, or victims of child sexual abuse or domestic violence, that distinguishes them from victims of other types of crime. And of course, it's not always a very easy task because, every victim is different, but within this, singularities of each victims, we have nonetheless the groups of victims that suffer a similar type of harm, that have a similar needs which are related to the type of the crime. Right? And that's why in the directive on counterterrorism, for instance, we have extensive measures of supporting protection that reflect the cross-border character of victims, because we know that victims of terrorism very often, there is this very strong cross-border aspects. Or for instance, another point is the need to establish in advance the support services that will be able to give immediate response to victims of terrorism immediately after terrorism attack, because we know that from the past that when it happens there is chaos. So you need to make sure that the member states prepare something well in advance. When it comes to victims of sexual violence, for instance, there is this big need of ensuring the specialized centers, like a rape center, for instance, that will be working around the clock, because these victims will require immediate support, including medical supports and psychological support. So these are the elements which really distinguish these victims from others, and this type of support services should be in a more specialized in the so-called sectorial legislation. The Victims' Rights Directive, however, is the instrument thanks to which no victim would be left behind. So on one hand, it encompasses all measures that are related to the more structural approach of victims, including the set of procedural rules. You may also see that the sectorial legislation does not have all these general rules in related to victims' participation in criminal proceedings. This is left really for the general directive, but also all measures that are relevant really for all victims of all crimes. Let's not forget the sectorial legislation is not really a lex specialis to the Victims' Rights Directive. It is applicable on the top of the Victims' Rights Directive. And that's why it is so very much important to make sure that the Victims' Rights Directive is fully comprehensive and englobes really all aspects of the needs of victims within the criminal proceedings, but also before and after. And the sectorial legislation will cap really only on the top, only for this specific groups of victims who may have indeed the individual needs. And this is the approach that we are following also with these negotiations. Maybe interesting to say that during the discussions on the directive on domestic violence and violence against women, then co-legislators, mostly it was coming from the member states, were often saying, oh, no, this topic is too horizontal. We will not deal with this topic during the negotiations of a sectorial legislation. So now it's the time to recall to the member states, here we're discussing the more general approach. So when it comes to certain big horizontal issues, we are recalling it to the co-legislators that this is the right moment to get deeper and make sure that we have an agreement on such overarching elements. Thank you.
Thank you, Kasia. And Slavomir, maybe to ask you, because obviously you are sitting in that room while these discussions are happening. So is Commission managing to remind the co-legislators of their comments of like a few short months ago? And is there like legislators' fatigue or something? Do you feel that there is still interest in victims' rights, even though the activity on the development and adoption of some sectorial instruments has been quite intensive in the past 4 or 5 years?
Thank you for that question. What I wish to say is that we do not often disagree with Kasia, but today I may not more agree what she has just said about the relations between sectorial directives dedicated partially to victims' rights and the horizontal directive. If I may just add a few sentences on that and then respond to your question. Indeed, sectorial developments quite often pose for us a point of reference or the point of departure. We take inspirations for more developed regulations that apply to victims, specifically in the newly adopted directive on violence against women or directive on trafficking in human beings, where I would say in nature they are more developed institutionalized approach towards certain types of victims. This is the opportunity, but sometimes this is also the challenge, because not everything can be easily adopted and inserted in the horizontal directive. Not all institutions could apply. Some of them would be simply too broad to encompass all types of victims. And that's the challenge on the work related to the horizontal directive, since to a large extent, it needs to be very general. So it doesn't show its focus only on this or that type of victims, but simply all the arrangements needs to accommodate the victims' needs, meaning all victims, not only the specific ones. Now, relating to your question, indeed, the discussion which we have had on the let's say, quite intensive work related to this and other instruments that are at this moment on the agenda of the Council show to a certain show also the positive, I would say, attitude of the member states to continue working on new pieces of legislation, even though sometimes there are provided certain messages that this or that regulation perhaps goes too far, or we may need to have more time to reconsider how this should be properly transposed into national legislation. But one remark that I wanted to share with you is that the victim approach, I would say, is an element that is already well established in the EU law. I couldn't imagine a few months ago, when I started working on another file related to the fight against corruption, which is also quite an important instrument on the agenda of the Council of the European Union. And there you will find also certain provisions and proposals to introduce a victims approach. I mean, a while ago you could think there is no direct victim with respect to corruption offenses. But also here, this sensitivity and the new, I would say, model, the new approach towards victims' rights make the EU co-legislators deal also with the standing of victims with respect to this type of offenses.
And maybe, Lev, just to conclude this discussion with you, and what is the kind of position and the thinking of Victim Support Europe regarding sectorial legislation? Is that an opportunity, or is that an obstacle for the rights of all victims of all crimes?
Well, I think we're on the same line on this one. It's both. It's a risk and an opportunity. I mean, we advocated for the Victims' Rights Directive to be negotiated and adopted before the sectoral, because that would have solved a lot of complications, and it would have ensured that we didn't have a hierarchy of victims, which I think remains a risk, the way things are, both in terms of adoption of the laws. As one example, protection measures for victims of domestic violence and gender-based violence. Those protection measures should be available based on risk, not based on gender or type of crime. And that's the sort of thing that has to be achieved both at the European level and the national level. We know at the national level many member states started off protection orders focused on domestic violence, and it's only in recent years they've started to think about other groups. It's a fundamental rights issue. It's the right to life, the right to safety. So I think that's a risk of both the negotiations, but it's also a risk with the implementation. So the Violence Against Women Directive, I think, is due to be transposed from next year. You have the Human Trafficking Directive, Child Sexual Exploitation. You've got a number of other directives which include pieces around victims. We know from the Benedict research that has just completed, we had their conference yesterday, the vast majority of the progress on victims' rights in the last several years has been focused on specific groups of victims, in particular victims of domestic violence. It's great, and it has to happen, but the risk now is that with all of these new laws, we will have a repetition, which is that the Victims' Rights Directive will be implemented secondary to those other laws. And we also know what is a good way of resolving that, which is having a strategic, coordinated approach. And we've proposed solutions to that. We have the National Victim Support Framework. What does that mean? And happily, there are member states that are picking up on this. It means having a long-term strategy for all victims of crime, as well as strategies for the specific groups. It means having the national coordination mechanisms. So as Guillaume, wherever Guillaume is, said, the French system worked well because they had a minister identified and responsible for victims, and then they had a coordination mechanism which included NGOs and government working together to make decisions together. And then they expanded that and devolved it down to the local level so that the implementation happened. And then they had a funding framework to do that. We also know that countries which have independent commissioners, which have oversight mechanisms, and which have repeated, regular data collection exercises are the ones that continue to progress. So this is what is the opportunity and the risk. If states now go ahead and do what they did 10 years ago after the Istanbul Convention was adopted, which is focused on one group of victims, we will continue to have fragmentation. And if they continue to say that funding is the problem, the solution is to be efficient and coordinated. Many of the things you need to do for one group of victims, you can do for all at the same time at minimal to no extra cost. So I think that's part of what it is. I understand that there's going to be a ministerial meeting in maybe a couple of weeks' time thinking about the future of criminal justice. This is the time to really be thinking about these kinds of issues, because the future of criminal justice has victims at the centre, and not just the words at the centre, but actually the concept of it. There's a victim-centred approach. The UN proposed it first, which talks about victim choice, victim voice, accompaniment. So there's a lot there that we know. When it comes to how to get that right for support, again, it's about a coordinated system where all crime services and the specialist services that focus on specific groups work together, not in competition. And that means that at the European level, it's not just about having protocols. So it's great that the Commission proposed a coordination solution, but we have to go further than those protocols, and we have to have a much more in-depth way of coordinating. We need to make sure that victims can be accompanied, that they have the court support, that they have the specialized focus in the justice agencies, as João mentioned, and in the law enforcement agencies. So this is the opportunity. And just one other point that it was mentioned earlier, the EU is now currently looking at the next 5-year funding program. What we know is that the European Commission is consistently moving towards large funding streams. And that approach is consistently excluding smaller NGOs. So at the one side, they're saying that NGOs and democracy matter, and NGOs are critical to democracy. And on the other side, they're saying, but they're too much effort for us. I put it that way because I think it's important to remember it in those terms. They have to put in the administrative effort to allow NGOs at the local level to access EU funds, because they won't survive, because at the national level, if you're surviving on project-based funding, that's all you're doing. You're surviving. You're not growing, you're not thriving, and you're not thinking about policy. And if you think about, I think it was Lena Kaiser said that they're serving 30,000 victims. That Gulf I'm talking about, I don't know the exact population of Finland, but in the Netherlands, 6 million. The Netherlands is 10 million. In the Netherlands, one organization is serving 1 million plus victims. Right, so there's something fundamentally different in a European Union where we're supposed to have free movement of goods, services and people, where we have equality of justice, where you have these differences. So these are some of the risks and opportunities, and it has to start with a strategic framework where all victims are looked after.
Thank you. Actually, one thing that you mentioned, and I think we just need to kind of make sure it's out there, is that victim support is not a project. It's an ongoing societal service that has to have a kind of sustainable, permanent stream of funding, and not just applying for funding year in, year out, because that also doesn't allow for strategic planning and strategic thinking. So I just felt like I had to add that. So thank you. Just quickly now, because we are running on a schedule, I'm just waiting for Larissa to start throwing timer at me. We do know that obviously there has been back and forth between the Commission and the European Parliament and the Council, and then the Commission came out, as we said, with quite a strong proposal. European Parliament strengthened it further, and then the Council came and kind of trimmed it down a little bit. So just in terms of, I have some topics noted down here, so you tell me what is the one that has the highest chances of being improved now through the trialogues. So I have compensation, legal remedies, reporting mechanisms, individual assessment, referrals, legal assistance, and privacy protections. So which one of these, do any of these stand any chance in coming back into the proposal?
Well, I think they all stand a good chance of having something tangible, right? Maybe at the end of the day we'll not have exactly what we have proposed as the European Commission, but really the negotiations are good, frank, open, honest, and everyone aims at coming up with the possibly best solutions for victims. So yes, I'm just taking one example. I won't be speculating here which of these proposals will have the highest chances of being the strongest, because we are really in the middle of discussions. Nothing is written in stone, and I don't want to preempt it. But for instance, when it comes to the provision on compensation, yes, the Commission has proposed something extremely ambitious, and I think that everyone realizes that. I see the colleagues here from some member states are smiling. Oh yes, we did have proposed something very, very ambitious, but the idea is now really to sit down and look for the common objectives, which is, and I think everyone shares that, everyone realizes that it is not okay that victims suffer from secondary victimization when the process of the criminal justice is over and they have to execute the compensation adjudicated to the offender by the judge. No one agrees to, add additional suffering for victim with this process. This is not the objective of compensation. The objective of compensation is to ensure that victims can heal in the best possible way, that the victim is recognized, that it gives certain sort of a closure. So yes, we have proposed something extremely ambitious, but now it's time to sit down with the member states and to look into what is feasible, what can be adopted in all member states as a minimum standard of the European legislation that will be later on transposed into national legislation, and at the end of the day will bring very concrete fruits for victims of crime who are claiming compensation. So I just gave one example, but please don't quote me that this is the provision. No, I think that all the provisions that you have enumerated here have very good chances of being substantially strengthened in a way that works for victims in the most effective way, while imposing as little on member states as necessary and proportionate.
Thank you. And now going back to the Polish presidency and discussions around member states, obviously we mentioned a few times that it's not enough just to adopt legislation. Once it's adopted, we need to implement it. We also mentioned a few times our research and our kind of data collection and knowledge gathering around how things unfortunately do not work for victims at the member state level. So we will adopt the directive hopefully before the 30th of June 2025. So how do we then keep the momentum going with member states and with the implementation? So what about transposition? What about investment in implementation, actually making sure that now the new set of rights work for victims in their daily lives?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question.
Give me a good answer then.
If it was that easy, the presidency, unfortunately, is not responsible for reviewing the way how the member states impose certain provisions or the entire instrument into national law. We have here the competent body, namely the European Commission, who does it in its remit. So we are completely, in that respect, in their hands, and they have quite strong instruments to convince the member states that this piece of legislation should be properly implemented. We have also proofs following the previous directives that this, let's say, friendly reminder
called infringement
procedure works in practice. So it does, and everybody is aware of this. Therefore, perhaps it is also a way of a very prudent way of negotiations, what specific provisions may mean and to what extent member states are obliged to transpose certain provisions. As you know, a directive is a very specific type of a legal instrument while compared with the regulation that applies directly. Here with the directives, you have let's say, the objective that is to be achieved, meaning the elevation of the rights of victims and the level of protection. Nevertheless, how the member states are to achieve that, it's completely left to the discretion of the member states. And that's, well, let's say, the flexibility which is in this instrument, but on the other hand is also, I would say on behalf of the Commission, if I may put that way, also the difficulty to assess whether or not this specific type of legislative or non-legislative, because this is something also that needs to be taken into consideration, that directive does not always need to be implemented only through legislative measures. What we do at the Council's level, because there is no such mechanism like the infringement procedure, which lies in hands of the Commission, nevertheless, we still have this open formats, which is the meeting of the experts, where they may discuss, and this has happened in the past, practical implications related to implementation or how they work in practice with respect to certain instruments. That's one of the examples. The other, which has been already invoked, is the well-functioning network of the experts of victims of crime, where the experts from central level meet and exchange best practices, but also challenges encountered while working on or while implementing or while applying simply certain provisions of this directive. And I will stop here.
Thank you. Maybe Lev, if you can add some points from the point of view of Victim Support Europe in terms of keeping the momentum going with the member states.
Well, if I go back first of all to what are the risky articles, I think there are rights and obligations which have an immediate potential large-scale cost. So those ones immediately member states are fearful of, especially where they find it difficult to define what the cost may be. So, and that's, for example, with compensation. I think even if we cut, there's a fundamental difference between an entire deletion of the article, which is kind of the starting point of the Council, compared to where we could at least get to a point where there are some beneficial impacts by including the article, and then we can do those non-legislative measures and we can work with member states. So one is the cost implication. The other one is where there's a potential implication for the functioning of the justice system itself, the criminal proceedings. And there are always challenges as well, but there's also lots of solutions. Again, it's where the article is deleted in its entirety that it's problematic. There's always ways to get around solutions. In 2011, during the negotiations, the Maltese government had a fundamental problem with the review of the decision to not prosecute, because their Attorney General is the one that does that review, and under the Constitution, his or her decision can't be reviewed. We found a solution because people got around the table and worked it out. The risk at the moment is that the strong, effective member states remain silent in the face of others who don't want something. And that happens, and I don't know if it's happening, but that happens in situations where the strong member states say, but that doesn't affect me. And we need to have those member states, countries like France and the Netherlands, who have very strong systems, to speak up in solidarity with victims and say, yes, but this is important because we have a union here. And when again we talk about risks to the union, this is part of it. We have to have those member states in the negotiations saying, this doesn't affect me, but this is important to have for victims. So I think that's really important to think about as well. In terms of how we're working together, this is a good example of how you make a difference. We have a presidency that cares and has made it a flagship. We have a commission that has, again, a committed set of individuals that want to do something and are actively working towards it. And then we are able to work with governments as well to do non-legislative action. So we are increasingly working with the Estonian government, Portuguese governments, Maltese governments, Latvian, Lithuanian. There are ways that now they're seeing the possibility to work with NGOs to achieve change as well. So I think this is the combination that we need to work on. But we need our members as well. We need other organizations to be speaking to the European Parliament, to speaking to their governments, to say that this matters and why it matters, and to influence things, because there's a risk that with an anti-EU sentiment, that people won't understand how important it is that we have minimum standards across all member states, so that if you're a German traveling to Greece and you're victimized, you have the same rights and services. And we should not forget that this is about a single union, a secure and safe union. We talked about Tampere. You know, this is it. The member states came together and said the EU should have a common area of freedom, security and justice. And working for victims is fundamental to that. So I think that's the risk and the opportunity, is getting the member states, the parliamentarians, to really listen to victims and listen to NGOs and act on those different mechanisms and understand risks. And I'll give you an example of the way a risk happens. There is a right in the directive for victims' privacy. So privacy is a fundamental right for everyone. But when it comes to justice, the privacy of a victim doesn't seem to be as fundamental as for others. So if there is a risk to a victim, that their information should not be provided to the defence. But the Council have introduced an amendment that says, unless there is a risk to the defendant. Well, if I understand that rightly, that means so now the defendant's life is more important than the victim's life. That's that's the only way I can interpret it, instead of leaving it to the judge. So these are the ways in which the rights of victims and the status and situation of victims can be brought down. And I'm not saying this is where it will remain. I'm sure that they're going to negotiate it. But we all have to be aware of where these risks are. We have to be aware that there are risks that victims won't be referred to victim support from the police because of the EU directive. We have to be aware that there are risks that needs assessment won't function well because of the directive. And so we have to keep listening and be listened to when it comes to these negotiations.
Thank you. And Kasia, maybe one for you. So hopefully we get the directive in 2025. We also have the current victims' rights strategy, EU victims' rights strategy, that is coming to an end in 25. So what is the Commission looking into in the future? Will there be a new strategy? How is the new directive and the new ambition going to inform that strategy? And how is the strategy also going to try to potentially fill in some gaps that might remain after the adoption of the directive? So, for example, there was an attempt to have data collection as part of the new directive, how that's going to look or not. So is the strategy going to try to fill in some gaps there, or I see that you're looking at allies.
For the data collection, yes. Okay, well, thank you for this question, Alexandra. I don't want to speculate too much, of what will stay in the directive and what will not, because we are not there yet. I mean, we are really in the middle of very intense negotiations. The provision on data collection has not been even touched in our discussions on technical trilogue, so it's really too early to say what will come out of this. Of course, for us, it is extremely important to ensure that we have a very strong provision on data collection, requiring member states not only to send to us what is available at the federal level, because this is how the member states, especially some, would like to see this provision, but to collect data that will be comparable and sent to us, and then together with the help of maybe Fundamental Rights Agency, will be able to build new policies on the basis of concrete data. So, but I mean, we don't know what will come out of this provision at this stage, so I really wouldn't like to preempt anything. When it comes to the strategy, we know that the next strategy will be there, and that's already very good news. This is something that our Commissioner McGrath has promised to the European Parliament during his hearing. So we have this one in stone, and that is already very, very good. Now, of course, we need to look at the achievements of the current strategy 2020-2025 to see what has worked fine under this strategy, what has not, what needs to be kept as the sort of ongoing actions, and what are the new elements that will need to be added. And then, of course, there are certain elements such as coordination and cooperation that we are still requesting the member states to do, and that we'll still commit ourselves to continue at the European level. Also, when it comes to cooperation with the non-European entities and United Nations, Council of Europe, and other third countries. But when it comes to the new additions, well, I think that there are two ways of looking of what we could have them. One is what I have already mentioned a little bit earlier, is we will look into the leftovers from the directive to see what could not have been absorbed by the directive because of its nature, or because the co-legislators did not find it suitable to be in the directive. Then we could reconsider to what extent such actions could be in the strategy. And another thing is that, you know, with in the past 5 years since the adoption of the current Victims' Rights Directive, a lot of things have happened. Some of them were not very, actually a lot of them were not very positive, and they brought a lot of victims of different types of crime. So we'll need to deal with issues such as mass victimization, including victims of war crimes, victims of torture, victims of hostage taken, victims of online crimes, which is a phenomenon that already existed 5 years ago, but to see to what extent, you know, it's developing now, it seems that it may be indeed necessary to have it there. Victims of police violence, someone was mentioning today. So, I mean, I'm not committing right now to have these elements in the next strategy, because we are not there yet, and it's not just me taking this decision. We have, of course, the whole process involving the entire European Commission and all the stakeholders, including you. You will be definitely consulted before we come up with the new strategy. It's just, you know, some preliminary ideas that are circulating here and there. We'll also search for the inspiration from the Victims' Rights Platform, which I'm chairing. It was very nice to see earlier during this short video, maybe not here, but at least to see during this short video, that many organizations that are in my Victims' Rights Platform, where they're very much vocal, asking for stronger revised Victims' Rights Directive. I'll be definitely using the platform also to listen to what they would like to see in the next strategy. So already now I can start asking you if you have any ideas, if you believe that there is any particular subject that would require to be maybe placed in the next strategy. You are very much welcome to come up with these ideas. And then, of course, if these ideas could be also supported, and here we come back to the beginning of your question with the data-based evidence, that would be even better, and that it would make it much stronger candidate to be placed in the next EU strategy on victims' rights. So if I may, I would like to ask everyone for this little homework exercise, so you can start considering, and we'll do our best to make sure that your ideas will be represented, because at the end of the day, the strategy is for the victims, and the role of the victim support organizations here is extremely important, and will not do anything without the victim support organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Kasia. And maybe just like one final question for Lev, and then time's up. So obviously a lot of new opportunities, challenges are coming up. So the new directive, the new strategy, how is Victims Support Europe viewing this as an opportunity, and what can be done in the next few years by civil society to actually advance victims of crime, rights of victims of crime, and how can we use these instruments that come from the EU level and then make a difference for lives of victims in member states?
Well, there's a huge opportunity. The first strategy was a really important moment, because it sent a message that the Commission and the European Union was prioritizing this. And by having that strategy there, time's up. By having that strategy there, it put it on the agenda, not just in DG Justice, but across other DGs as well. That's a really important part of the next 5 years, is mainstreaming victims' rights and victims' policy across all areas, because it's not only about justice, it's about the healthcare system, it's about our security, it's about the resilience and cohesion of societies. We have all of these UN SDGs, something like 9 of the SDGs are relevant for the victims field as well. And we have this risk that security defense funding will take away from funding in our area. We have the risks, again, with global funding reductions, that we will lose out, because we're all here saying this is important. I don't think the people on climate change think that this is important, or defense think it's important. So we have to be seen as part of this bigger agenda and be seen to be an essential element of that bigger agenda. And that means having even if we only have victims mentioned across those different funding programs, it gives us a door into other activities. We know that when the private sector or the police or the judiciary see that there's a priority that includes the word victim and victim support, they come to our organizations and come to us, and then we can really make a difference. The moment we started talking to governments that there was an EU funding program that they could access that allowed them to implement the directive, we're, I think, now working with 11 member states to make real change on the ground, working NGOs and government together. They can't do it on their own. We can't do it on our own either. So I think this is the next stage. It's this genuine implementation, but not waiting 5-7 years to work out how to do it. It's already starting now. And again, starting with a funding program which doesn't require NGOs to pay 20% contributions, which doesn't exclude us because we're not big enough, or we can't keep up with the administration. So, and which doesn't lose us amongst a larger funding program where we don't seem to matter. I think these are some of the big risks, but also real opportunities. I think there's Horizon funding programs which allow for technological advancements. We should be looking at big tech, digitalization, which helps our organizations to deliver services and which helps them to work with the agencies as well. So I think these are amazing opportunities, and the European Commission supporting NGOs work with governments, especially with governments who aren't naturally inclined to work with NGOs. I think that's a big challenge now as well, as we look to the future.
Well, thanks a lot to all three of you for your insights, contributions, and also very, very positive outlook towards the future of the Victims' Rights Directive. So thanks a lot, and I think Marina has some work for us now.
Before we go to have our drinks, I would like to thank all of the speakers and express my heartfelt thanks to the people who are behind the scenes preparing this event and the whole year-long campaign. Comms and Events team Lizelot, Dylan, Ruben, Marta, registration desk Katie and Sarah, policy team Efti, Paula, Onya, and then the rest of the 20 people who supported us in preparing all this. Thank you. And then comms team, it's, I think, the youngest people here in this. They've prepared a short interactive session. It's just 1 minute. A quick Slido to get your ideas, and maybe that's how we can contribute already to the future Victims' Rights Directive, the new one. To share. And all our interns who will support us with a report after the note that they have. Yes. Yeah. So we just quickly ask you to share your ideas on how we want to improve victim support and victims' rights in the next 10 years, be it a national establishing a national strategy or whatever you suggest. Let's collect all those ideas and we will compare those ideas 10 years later at this press club. You can scan the QR code or you can just type the link and put the password. Lev, you can maybe comment if you see the words. Respect, support. What else, Larissa? Collaboration. Better legislation. It's more about the vision, some concrete proposals. Support all victims. Compensation. Intersectionality. Discrimination. Investment.
Founding, collaboration, all victims,
Partnership. 3 more. Funding, that's the biggest one. Rights for all. Partnerships and funding are 2 keywords, yes. Unity. Love? Let's finish on this note, on love. I will give the floor now to Lev just to wrap up the final wording. And we are afterwards reconvening over here in this aquarium for a group photo. Thank you.
I won't hold you up. I won't keep you away from drinks. I know it's been a long day. We always pack lots into the day, so I appreciate all of you being here in the morning with lots of conversations. I think for me, one of my hugest takeaways is hope. Really, I think from the very first speech and throughout, even if I sounded a bit harsh maybe earlier, but that's part of my job. But I think everyone is determined to make a difference, from governments to the European Commission to NGOs to victims themselves. And that's the hugest takeaway I would have from this. It's 35 years celebrating the past, but it's 35 years looking towards the future as well. And we've talked about partnerships. They are essential. NGOs are an essential element. Civil society, now more than ever, I think, when we see about the fragmentation of society, when we see the risks going forward, we have to maintain a strong civil society. We have to ensure that victims are at the center of this and are heard. And it's understood that working for victims is a fundamental rights issue, but it's also a societal issue. It's a security issue as well. So we had lots of wonderful discussions. I'm so grateful to see Helgard as well. Some very good memories from Helgard and from many of the others as well, discussing how we got to where we are, the efforts of individuals. And I think what I took away from that as well, right at the beginning, it wasn't one person working for victims, it was judges, probation services, victim workers, psychologists, all coming together and saying, we have a problem. We have a fundamental group of people, a huge group of people who aren't being helped. And I think we're at that stage now where we're coming together, and it's not just victim support organizations, but again, police officers, probation services, restorative justice workers, everybody coming together and saying, well, what do we need to do to transform all of these rights that we've had since 1985 and the Declaration of Basic Principles? What do we need to do now to make that reality in every member state in the same way, and not have this huge differences of approaches? We have to respect the differences of and cultural differences, legal differences, but there are some fundamental basic principles about how we need to treat victims and what should be in place. I think we understand that and we see it. That's why we talk about minimum standards. So I think there's a lot of opportunities. You heard about the risks as well. The risks can be prevented by all of us coming together and speaking out. That's why partnerships, unity is there. That's why funding is so important. We know what we need to do, and we need to apply funding to make that happen as well. So I'm really grateful to all of you for being here today. I'm looking forward to having drinks with you as well. And I wish you a wonderful day, wonderful evening, and a good journey home as well. Thank you very much. And I think we'll just run there. Okay. Thank you.